2021. And this is a meeting of the Virginia Redistricting Commission. I'm Greta Harris, co-chair of the commission, who will be presiding over this meeting. I'd like to remind members, staff, and any other speakers on today's virtual meeting of a couple of items. First, please keep your microphone on mute until you're ready to speak. This improves the quality of the audio for everyone for the meeting that's attending the meeting. And before you speak, please remember to unmute yourself. Also, please remember to state your name before speaking, and especially before making any type of motion. This helps us in keeping track of what's happening. Public comment message. Registration for public comment has closed. We do have individuals who signed up to provide comment. Such comment will be limited to 2 minutes at the discretion of the chair. I also note that members of the public who wish to comment on an agenda item may do so by sending an email to varedist@dls.virginia.gov. The comment will be posted on the division's website at www.virginiaredistricting.org. Again, for members of the public who would like to comment on today's meeting, the email address is varedist@dls.virginia.gov. It's good to see everyone, although virtually, and I hope that everyone is feeling well and is healthy as we go forward. Next Thursday, September 9th at 1 p.m. will be our next in-person meeting. And because of the ongoing pandemic and rising positivity rates, we have instituted additional safety protocols for all future in-person meetings that include social distancing and the way we will be seated in the rooms where we'll be meeting, mask mandates for anyone, that includes members, staff, and citizens who will be in the room, will be required to wear masks, and we'll have additional sanitizing materials and solutions for people to utilize so that we can keep everyone safe. This is unusual for us right now because by state statute, we need to meet in person, or at least have a quorum that's meeting in person in order to take votes. And because of what happened a week or so ago, and everyone is sort of winding down the quarantine period, we are meeting virtually today because the clock that we're all working under is ticking. And we want to keep advancing our map drawing work. Today will be for discussion only. We will not be taking any votes in this format. We will have presentations, 3 of them shortly, and we can ask questions. We can have good discussion, which I hope that we will. But no votes will be taken. That will be, we will have an opportunity to get clarification, think about it, and then next Thursday, when we have our next commission meeting, which I think is September 9th at 1 p.m., we will take any follow-up votes that are required after today's meeting. So with that, I think everyone has the agenda, and we have
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes. I forgot the roll call, didn't I? There we go. Thank you, Claire. If you could do that, please, and then we'll go on and get started.
Mr. Abrenio.
Here.
Mr. Feliciano.
Present.
Mr. Harrell.
Here.
Mr. Hutchins.
Present.
Mr. Kumar.
Here.
Ms. Thornton. Delegate Adams.
Here.
Senator Barker.
Here.
Senator Locke.
Present.
Senator McDougall.
Here.
Delegate McQuinn,
Here.
Senator Newman,
Here.
Delegate Ranson,
Here.
Delegate Simon,
Here.
Ms. Babachenko,
Here.
Ms. Harris.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. So today we will hear three presentations from three different sets of consultants, and we'll actually be at the very beginning stages of looking at adjusting maps for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our first set of consultants that will be up will be Esmel Meeks and Mindy Carlin, and we thank you. It's good to see you in this format, and we will turn it over to you to present updates on our communication and outreach activities.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Mindy Carlin with Access Point Public Affairs. I have some slides that I can share, but I believe I'm going to need to be made a co-host in order to do that. I know they were also included in your packet.
Yep. Shay, can you make her Mindy a co-host, please? And I guess I think everybody who's presenting will
She
probably
should
have a
already be able to share. All panelists have the ability to share their screen.
Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Madam Chair, Mindy Carlin with Access Point Public Affairs. Esmel Meeks and I will kind of tag team today's update on our communications and outreach. And with our first slide being for Esmel.
Thank you, Mindy. Madam Chair, thank you. We are using a program called Jambo. It's a robust CRM software to collect, sort, and report comments and mapping data. We're currently in the process of uploading all comments and individual plan maps and integrating Jambo so that the input and reporting is more efficient. So if there are any emails with comments or maps, we would ask that you would send them to VA redistricting 2021@gmail.com. But in order to move forward with Jambo, we've sent over some data fields that need to be approved by the Commission, which would include name, email, region, stakeholder type to include individual, business, organization, or other, community of interest, general comment versus a response to a map, and whether the person resides in the area that they're commenting on.
So just to expand, Madam Chairman, Mindy Carlin, just to expand on Esmel. So these categories would be the categories by which we will be able to sort the data and the input collected. So as you can see, the regions that he mentioned would obviously be based on the same region, the same 8 regions you guys are focused on. We thought it'd be helpful to be able to distinguish between an individual stakeholder versus a business versus an organization. Communities of interest is relatively straightforward with respect to that. We had the recommendation from staff that it'd be helpful to understand if feedback provided was a general comment versus a response to a proposed map. And then finally, in talking with the chairs, talked about the importance of understanding whether or not a person or group actually resides within the area that they'll be commenting on. And so as we thought about a host of different ways to consider that, come forward recommending that we just use the honor system and ask the question so that there is no interpretation or anything that needs to happen. And so as Esmel said, it's really important that we ensure that the way that we are uploading the data we have and will upload the data that is gathered moving forward, that we determine now kind of how that's organized in a way that will be most valuable to you in the work that you're doing.
Okay, so at this point, I guess we are looking for feedback from members of the Commission. Are these the categories that you would want the magnitude of emails and maps and comments coming in, is this helpful to you if Jambo can sort by those categories? Are there additional ones? Are there ones that you think are not necessary? Would love to hear feedback from members.
Madam Chairman, this is Rick Harrell. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I've got it under region. I think it would be helpful to have, in addition to that, the locality of residence of these folks, like Lynchburg and that region, you know, I mean, and I don't know whether that has to be a separate category or whether, I mean, if you just categorize them by regions, which is fine, if somehow there could be a hyphen and the individual's locality of residence be out there to the side. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
That sounds reasonable. Okay.
Sean Kumar.
Don? Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Harrell's comment. That would be helpful because they're talk about Southwest or Northern Virginia. Somebody could, you know, Winchester means something a lot different. Somebody who is themselves to be in a region, and they're not. And then when it comes to general comment versus
Okay. Members, can you please mute your screens if you're not speaking? Thank you. Go ahead, Sean.
No problem. Thank you. So when it comes to, I mean, community of interest seems like it might be self-contained, but the general comment versus response to map category, I think some additional subcategories or breakdowns. I don't know if within these bullets there will be more categories, but and so I'm seeing Mindy shaking her head and I probably know, so that's helpful. You know, if it's a general comment, like, you know, to categorize the types of comments we've heard, a lot of them have been, you know, keep communities of interest together, or, you know, disregard, you know, start fresh, or open and inclusive process. I feel like those would be general comments and could be an almost like a policy suggestion, versus a comment on a map might be a separate category. And within those general comments or policy suggestions, whatever we choose to call them, you know, I would hope that we could somehow at least try to aggregate data or search within that, because it might be helpful at some point to know, hey, what percentage of people said, you know, don't use incumbent addresses, or start fresh on maps. And to break down those, I get it would probably be too much, but you know, those are my initial thoughts.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Mindy Carlin. So what we could do on that, we would need agreement by members of the commission on what the tags would be, but we can certainly identify certain tags that we expect or that we have seen that are common, or keyword tags. So we could, you know, if a comment included the word community of interest, for example, we could click, yeah, we could tag with community of interest. Or if they, you know, a comment to, you know, we could pick a series of keywords and add tags. But we would want, Esmel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would want to be very careful about interpreting and categorizing comments. So it would really be if a word is mentioned or series of words is mentioned, then we could tag that input as such. And that way you could say, well, these are all that use the words community of interest, or these are all the feedback that mentioned political boundaries, or so if there are recommendations, Madam Chair, from commission members on what some of those key words that the group could find consensus around, now would be the time to add those tags. But I would be reluctant to go much beyond that approach.
So Mindy, that would mean if they're tagged, then anyone who is sorting through that database would be able to pull that up and then make their own assumptions around all comments that have community of interest associated with it, right? We could look through that and make our own assumptions from there.
Madam Chair, yes, that would be the concept. So we would note when uploading the data, that particular point of input, and note a tag for any of the pre-identified words, keywords, so that you'd be able to search based on that and then look further and interpret on your own. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So certainly community of interest has been mentioned quite a bit since we've been having public comments. Are there other key words that you would want tagged as we're sorting through this database? Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Mindy Carlin. So we could, I know that the gentleman who just commented also raised existing maps. That might be something, existing map or current map. Then you would be able to understand comments that may have been specifically in reference to starting fresh or using existing maps.
Right.
Another idea, there was something else that he mentioned that got, process, Madam Chair, if there is a comment related to the process, that might be another tag. I'm just reacting to kind of what the gentleman, I believe it was Mr. Harrell or Mr. Kumar.
Yep. And also when we're asking for the region, you can actually add another bullet to have locality. That's not a big deal to be able to do that, so that we can sort within a regional footprint the locality that the person was commenting on.
Madam Chair, we can, Esmel can correct me if I'm wrong, we certainly can add another category. We probably want to do that as a drop-down menu with all of the localities that an individual commenting could choose. We want to distinguish between that individual's locality where they reside versus the locality that they are commenting on. Because in many cases so we need to understand the purpose of that, what you're looking for from that data. Do you want to know where that individual lives or resides or works, or versus what they are commenting on, in which case they would likely potentially have multiple localities.
Mr. Harrell, do you have clarification on that?
Yes, I think it's going to complicate things beyond reason to try to add localities in terms of the comment and localities of origin, of where they reside. So I think most of the people who said anything to do with specific comments about Lynchburg, Charlottesville, wherever, live there. So I think the locality of residence is the most useful one. Plus, it tells us that this person is commenting about things all over the state. I'm not drawing a negative or a positive connotation from that. I'm just thinking that the region, not only the region, but the specific locality of residence is the most useful one to me.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to, I think we can certainly do that. The only thing I will raise to members of the commission is that we may not have that information for input received to date. But certainly moving forward, we can add that field, and where we do have that based on input already received, we can indicate that, but just a point of note on that.
Okay, so there's a high probability that we won't be able to get that granular 100% of what's already been submitted. But when the information is there, we'll be able to capture it and be able to share that.
Yes.
Are there other comments that members have? Speak now, because this is, once we set this up, this is the framework by which a lot of information is going to be sortable for our use.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Kumar and then Delegate McQuinn.
Yeah, I don't know if we have, well, we're not voting today, so I guess I would urge our outreach team to maybe, if they can, take a look at some of the communications we've received for some of those words you were just asking for. A couple that I've had for sorting data might include gerrymandering, incumbent, open, and the fourth one would be fair. But that's just kind of from the gist of a lot of the emails and public comment we've heard.
Would you mind repeating the second word, Mr. Kumar?
Sure, it was gerrymandering was one, incumbent was another, open was a third, and fair was a fourth.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, James Abrinio.
Wait a minute, hold on one second, James. Delegate McQuinn, and then James Abrinio.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm listening to the discussion. I think maybe just for clarity for me, we're talking about sorting data, but are we incorporating the communication and outreach? Will that also be efforts to reach more challenging and difficult communities to help making certain that we're engaging them and getting feedback from those various communities? Because I don't know if I've necessarily heard that. And I'm saying that because I represent many of those communities, and I know that we have heard it over and over again that some individuals felt that certain communities were not being, necessarily targeted or engaged in the redistricting plans at all. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about that, possibly.
Yeah, and Delegate McQuinn, thank you. I think this is just on the data management. There's more presentation to come that's going to talk about the outreach, but I think all of us have been somewhat overwhelmed with all of the emails, and there are lots of comments on the website already. That's just trying to manage that so that it's more useful for us, and then future comments, which we reasonably expect a lot more coming in, we'll be able to sort with the framework that the consultants are recommending. But then we're going to get into the outreach piece of this as well. So thank you for bringing that up. We know that that's an important piece that we have to work on. Mr. Abrinio?
Yes, thank you. I don't know that I see any tag for if somebody wants to submit an original map. Do you guys have the ability, if I assume people are attaching original maps and all that, can we make sure that's part of one of the options? The other thing I would say, as far as tags, I guess I'm a little confused. Maybe we get a little more direction on how those are helpful to us, because Mr. Kumar made some good points about buzzwords that we've heard a ton about, but I don't know if it's, for me, if it's super useful to see a bunch of comments about fair and redistricting and gerrymandering. That's just kind of so general. I would think it would be more tags to, maybe region or some other specific issue that can help us kind of sort through that, if that makes sense.
Well, I think we will be able to get to the region so that we can sort of cluster comments associated with a particular area of the state. I think, Mr. Kumar, maybe you can help explain, but if gerrymandering, I think that's more around responding to our values, and then when we get to tough areas where we're negotiating on where lines should go, we might want to pull up that, I don't know, 70% of all the comments said, don't gerrymander, my community, or something like that. I don't know if that will be helpful. Mr. Kumar, do you have any clarification on that?
Yes, Madam Chair, thanks. I was thinking along those lines. I mean, if this is going to be a lot of extra work, I mean, it just, my main point, it all stemmed from just that second, community of interest might well be one of those key tags rather than a separate bullet. And just my thought that the general comment versus response to map might be a separate category. And then we would want some way of maybe being able to sort through general comments. Maybe that's searchable, and we could, Mr. Abrinio raises a good point. If this is a lot of extra work, I don't know how helpful it's going to be. But if we're saying, hey, we can at the outset filter through and just figure out what's the topic these people are talking about or including in their comments, those were things I thought might be helpful to sort.
Madam Chair?
Yes. please.
One option on the keywords may be to use the headers for your criteria that the commission adopted, the standards and criteria. Communities of interest is one of those, and I don't have them directly in front of me, but in the adopted document, perhaps that you could organize, it could be a strategy to organize public input as you may be considering certain kind of topics. Compliance, I think one was compliance with federal, state and local code and constitutions. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an approach.
Yeah. So is it our intention, if you're hearing some feedback now, that by next Thursday, you may have some of this in place so that members could play around with the database? Do you think that it would be up and running within a week?
Madam Chair, what we are trying to do, there is a tremendous amount of input that's been received to date via email and other formats. And so what we are going to need to do is to prepare that input, which is mostly in emails, as I understand it, into a spreadsheet that then can be uploaded to the platform. And so it's important to be able to identify what those fields are now, so that it's very difficult once we do the upload to then go in and add and make changes. Esma, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That is correct.
Okay. So today is our best window to be able to give feedback, so that once you start working, because again, the clock is ticking against us. And so I guess I'm looking at commission members to say this. I think we want to sort of maybe categorize or prioritize these categories. What are must-haves, which are the name, email, region, locality as much as we can, what kind of stakeholder, those are must-haves. And then I see that, Mindy, you put into the chat, you could add a question regarding whether a map has already been submitted or not. And that would tell us to dig a little deeper. So if those are critical must-haves, and then maybe the more qualitative issues are secondary around community of interest, or words like gerrymandering, or incumbents and things of that nature, or would be maybe useful, but not as useful as the must-haves. Can we get feedback on that?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
James Brinio.
Yes, sir.
So I like Ms. Carlin's idea, and now that I'm looking at this, of using criteria is at least the minimum tags.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at this, maybe we have we separate it. We have a comment section versus a map section. So if you're going to make a comment, then that's one option, or if you're going to either make a map or a response to a map. So that's the two broad categories. And then within that, we can tag it. And I think community of interest is one of the criteria, so we could add the other criteria. That makes a lot of sense. My question for Ms. Carlin or Mr. Meeks, if we develop tags now, could we later, let's say we're seeing a lot of information come in, could we then add subsequent tags later on? Is that a possibility, or is once we get the tags, that's the tags?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Esma Meeks. I would recommend that whatever tags we come up with now, we keep for the future. The problem with adding future tags is that the data that is inputted prior to adding those new tags will not be included in the reporting, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And
so,
Madam, just
go ahead.
Real quick. We'll follow up to that. So obviously there's many ways to do it. I think perhaps at the minimum we use the criteria as tags, and then over the next couple of days, perhaps we, as we're thinking it over, we can add more suggestions And I would also like public input. If the public has ideas of other tags they'd like to use, and maybe give us a few days to then get back to Meeks and Miss Carlin. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on, and maybe during the public comment period, we'll have some feedback from citizens on that. But time is of the essence, and I'm really hoping that by next Thursday we might have some of this already completed. So let me try to summarize one more time.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Delegate Simon.
It would be, I guess, what I'm still trying to figure out is what we're going to use this for. Is this a tool for commission members to just sort of use internally? Will members of the public be able to search it out? To know what tags I want, I guess I'm trying to figure out what it's for. I think those of us that are sort of used to receiving public comment and sort of synthesizing it, maybe, or I guess some of us are used to this, right? We sit in public hearings, we can sort of get a sense of where people are, what we were hearing. We can sort of our own sort of ways of internalizing that. Is this just something to sort of have some actual data or some statistical information to back up our gut hunches about these things? I mean, for instance, I don't need to search Lynchburg, at this point to know that we've heard far, far more people that want to keep Lynchburg together with whatever map that we come up with. So I'm just trying to figure out, and then the second part of that question is, where in the process does this get used and who uses it? The map makers? Like, we've already got 4 maps to look at this afternoon. I don't imagine that the map makers that drew the maps were looking at the public input. I guess maybe that's the next part of the process is we take what they did and we apply this data. Am I understanding the process right? I know it's a long topic.
So I think it's a couple of things. This information is primarily for us, and it's another way for citizens to give us input. And so let's say the map drawers are starting with the criteria that we've approved, and they're just sort of running the technical aspects of just proposing maps. But then it's up to commission members to take comments or potential maps that other citizens are providing to us, synthesize through that, and each member can approach it differently. And certainly I would imagine our elected officials are much more seasoned in getting a feel for how people are feeling. Some of us, this is our first attempt at something like this. So having a way to manage comments and or maps from a particular area of the Commonwealth will be helpful to me and maybe to other citizen members in helping to refine and shape and make comments on the proposed maps that have come more from a technical standpoint. I think that's when if our map drawers are just using science and executing on our criteria, then I think what the commission will bring is more the art side of this, to be able to be a little bit more nuanced based on comments that we'll be able to sort from citizens and other interested parties. That's at least my interpretation of that.
I guess with this question, if I can follow up, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Will the public have access to this database as well? Will this be forward-facing and inward-facing, or will it just be a tool of the commissioners?
Ms. Carlin, can you answer that?
Sure, Madam Chair, Delegate Simon. So the actual platform is not public facing. That being said, reports can be run off of the platform. So those reports could certainly be shared with members of the public, and the reports can include all of the information. It's just a matter of accessing the actual platform itself is what would be restricted. But all of the information all of the input received, as much or as little, but there's the capacity for all of that to be run through reports that can then be shared with the public at the commission's discretion. Esmel, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, all right. Senator Newman.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair. My concern is a bit along the lines of what the delegate just raised. I wonder exactly what we're going to use the information for. And in particular, if we decide that we're going to make this statistical information, that we think that this necessarily represents what the people of Virginia think, that would be, I think, a major mistake. I think that what it represents is the people that were kind enough and cared enough to log in, but I don't think in any way that it necessarily represents Virginians. If we wanted to do that, we know how to do scientific polls, and we could ask the commission to do that. But I don't believe that those that sign into a website necessarily represent what the public means. So if this is a tool to go and look at what people that think about a certain keyword is, I think that's fantastic. If it's going to be presented, however, as a scientific poll, I think that would be a massive overreach.
And I don't believe that it's looked at to be a scientific data point. I think it, again, this is art and science. Some of the science will be what the map drawers are doing, and the art and nuance will be, it's a data point of information that's coming in. I don't think anyone is thinking that it is absolute and complete, but for the multitude of comments and emails that we've all received, it just helps us to better manage that and get a touch point for how some citizens are feeling about certain areas of the state.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms. Carla.
Mindy Carlin, if I can just, I didn't comment on the analytics side. So we use the term data management because that's really what this is really just organizing the data. We are not planning to do any kind of analytical work or interpretation of the work. It really is a matter of organizing it in a way that will be most useful and most accessible to you in the work that you're doing. So I just wanted to make that point.
All right. So I'm going to try to summarize. So we're going to have some basic quantifiable data points of name, email, region / locality, stakeholder definition, and then potentially 2 additional more qualitative organization points, one being maps submitted, and then another one in under comments. And then under comments, we're tagging the criteria that the commission has already approved. So constitutional, mandates at the federal and staff level of voting rights. And then I think we start getting into things like community of interest and sort of goes down the priority area. Those would be the tags under comments. And then we'd have a separate category for maps that are sortable by region or locality. Does anyone have heartburn over that, or can we live with that as a data management construct for all of the input that has come into the commission to date and for future comments and maps that will come into us? Okay, all right. I think that's a way for us to get started, Mindy and Esmail, and we'll go from there. All right, let's keep going with the presentation because we do have quite a few more, and I think this is and all of the presentations are going to have a lot of comments, I think, by members. So we'll keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mindy Carlin. Just a few updates on where we're headed on messaging and website functionality. We are working on website optimization so that the commission website is more easily found when searched. If you have searched the commission, you'll note that it is not even on my first screen, the commission's website. So we'll be working to optimize that so it's easier to find the website. We are also working on some messaging updates on the home page that are more descriptive with respect to the who, what, where, when, how, why of the commission and what you're doing. We also have recommended that we add an immediate pop-up when a visitor is on the commission website to enable them to subscribe to receive future updates. We are also in the process of having some instructional graphics developed that kind of walk through a member of the public in kind of a graphical way how they can provide input. We're adding further kind of more descriptive definition of community's interest based on the code, but just trying to kind of make that a bit more understandable to members of the public, and then add a confirmation message so that once input is submitted, an individual knows that it's been received, and that is something that's not happening now. In addition, on messaging and website, we have prepared a draft of expanded FAQs that include a section on public input and engagement, census data, standards and criteria, the process, the commission, and other topics. We are working with DLS staff right now. All of the expanded FAQ language is pulled directly from either your approved standards and criteria document guidance, as well as code and statute. So we are being very sensitive to kind of stay within that, but want to be prepared to have a bit more detail as we continue with the process. And once those expanded FAQs are complete, if working with the chairs, of course, and staff, are happy to share that with commissioners so that if you, as an FYI, and if there are comments, questions, things missing, you have an opportunity to weigh in there. I'll switch it back to any questions, I should say, on messaging or website functionality, or Madam Chair, we can keep going and folks can interrupt as appropriate.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Harrell.
In terms of defining communities of interest, I don't think that's really defined anywhere, and especially among even the people of this commission. So I would do that with great trepidation and ask our lawyers what they would think of defining that. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Absolutely, Mr. Harrell. We agree 100%. The language that we have on explaining what a community of interest is is the exact language that is in the Constitution and in the code.
That's good. So you're not going to elaborate on that?
Absolutely not, Madam Chairman. Absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'd say, Mindy, keep moving forward. People will raise their hand if they have questions.
Have we lost Esmo?
I'm sorry, I was muted, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Esmo Meeks. So these are our outline outreach goals. Questions that we'll probably have from the commission are, how do you intend on reaching these goals, which we will outline in our outreach strategies. We want to reach and receive participation in the form of hearing attendance, comment, and map submissions from as many residents as possible. And we want to increase the attendance at future hearings. We want to reach attendance by utilizing broad print advertising, digital media, and related strategies to encourage public input, some of which Mindy outlined in the previous slide. We are actively working on creating graphics and content to start pushing out to advertise future hearings. We will conduct targeted outreach with historically underrepresented and disadvantaged populations to encourage input, and of course, other goals as identified by the commission.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Mindy Carlin. So shifting to some of the strategies to accomplish those goals. First of all, we have identified a really an efficient way to reach kind of many of the populations we're trying to reach with information about how to provide input, utilizing the state's existing relationships and networks, and in particular, working through the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of the Commonwealth, as well as the Secretary of the Commonwealth. We are aware that Dr. Underwood and many of the existing commissions have extensive networks and outreach lists that are already in place with key populations that we can leverage to share information about the important work that you're doing and how to provide input. And so we've listed just a few of those here. We've already had an initial conversation with Dr. Underwood about leveraging some of their contacts. They've had, I'm sure many of you are aware, extensive outreach related to COVID vaccination and testing, where they have established kind of strong networks there that could help us to connect with some key populations. We welcome kind of other suggestions with respect to existing state relationships as appropriate, as members want to share them. Also included in our outreach strategy. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, it's Margaret Ranson.
Yes, Ms. Delegate Ransom.
Previous slide. Okay, yep, that one. Nope. The groups that you're working with. I would suggest that maybe you work with a group with the rural, anybody that's working with the rural area. I would definitely say that they are underrepresented and certainly need a voice at the table. Many times they don't know about what's going on with commissions like this, and certainly we need to look out for them.
Delegate Ransom, do you know of a particular group or two that we could reach out to?
Madam Chair, Mindy, let me think about that, and I will try to get back, bring that up to the chair maybe before Thursday.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think we're going to be pushing Mindy and Ishmael, manage the data and comments, but also to start the outreach like right away. So I think we can constantly add additional groups, but since we're only talking about weeks, we really, right after Labor Day, we want to start pushing communications out. So the sooner you can get that to us, or if other people have other suggestions, we welcome that as ASAP.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair McQuinn, I would hope that we would list the faith community as an entity that, and then connect, and not necessarily go through some of these other organizations. I think they can stand on their own, and I think they need to be listed. They are probably, once again, the most influential independent, African-American independent group in all over the country, really. And so certainly in this, in Virginia. The other piece is the Virginia Indian Advisory Board. You might want to make sure that they are functional, because as of a couple of weeks ago, they were not. And they depend on the state to organize them, and I don't think that has happened. So you want to, probably want to look into that. Okay.
And Delegate McQuinn,
yes,
I know that there are several different like Baptist ministers
yes.
associations. Do you have contacts or?
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
So I think I would encourage all commission members, if you have suggestions, with an email, with a phone number, with a name of a key person, that you get it to Mackenzie and myself in the next few days. That would be greatly appreciated, and then we can pass it on to Mindy and Ishmael.
And Madam Chair, I was thinking also HBCUs.
Yep, I think we have some more. Is there another slide here, Mindy?
Madam Chair, yeah,
Yes.
There are a couple. So this slide is really focused just on existing state relationships and networks, not on non-state agencies or non-government organizations. So perhaps I can get through kind of our slides on approach, and then commission members may have ideas for things we may have missed.
Okay.
Would that be appropriate?
That sounds great. Keep going.
Madam Chair, a second strategy is to provide content and encourage input for use, to encourage input and participation in the process for use by Virginia elected officials to use as they are communicating with their constituents. We know a number of members of the General Assembly are, most communicate very regularly with their constituents, and some are already sharing information. But we want to at least provide that content so that elected officials are able to have easy access to that as they're communicating. We have discussed partnering with the Virginia Municipal League and Virginia Association of Counties so that information could also be shared with local government officials throughout the state to the extent they are communicating with the communities that they serve. So we would be covered with at the congressional level to the extent they want to communicate state level with General Assembly, and then local level through VML and VACO to help in disseminating information to a wide net. We have obviously will be leveraging social media to reach a broader audience as well, and we'll have more to share on that as we develop those recommendations. Providing content to complement leveraging the state relationships and networks that non-government organizations would be a significant piece of our outreach efforts, and we want to cast as broad a net as possible. So here we would be looking for groups like state, regional, local chambers of commerce and business groups, community organizations, historical, cultural organizations throughout the state. Delegate McQuinn, certainly connection directly with faith-based organizations as a critical population. Organizations, to Delegate Ransom's point, we recognize residents in rural areas are also a population that we want to ensure that we're reaching, and then others to be identified. And Madam Chair, to your point, we would like all of the members of the commission and members of the public as well, if there are organizations that we should include on this comprehensive list that will be sharing information with, we very much welcome that contact information and information. So we have one last slide on kind of next steps, but I will pause there, Madam Chair, because I know a number of commission members wanted to share some comments.
Thank you very much. And I think Delegate McQuinn had mentioned in that category of HBCUs as well, but for commission members, if you have thoughts or you see gaps on where the outreach will happen, again, if you have a name, an email, a phone number of an organization, please share that with Mackenzie and me as soon as you can, and then we'll get that to the outreach consultants. Are there other gaps or areas or constituent groups that you think are not being targeted at this point for outreach? And I'm sorry, I have a second screen here. You guys are on one screen and my camera's on the other, so I'm turning to the side to see.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate.
Yes, McQuinn. And I'm not sure if this is a targeted group or if you think that it would be effective to reach, but maybe even some of the daycares and seeing if certainly you could get that information from the daycares, get them involved and give it to the parents. And I know that there is a list of daycares and childcare centers that one of the state agencies work with. So, at least give it to some consideration anyway, because sometimes they're hard to reach group.
Okay, yep, and I think what we're looking for are infrastructure where the relationships are and trust are already there, and we're just giving them good information that can be deployed across those existing networks, just to shorten the time for people to be made aware of what's going on here. So put on your thinking caps and then really over the next couple of days, if you have that information, please feel free to send it to Mackenzie and me, and we will pass it on. Mindy, how about we wrap up on what's coming next?
Madam Chair, Esmel's going to take this slide and then one wrap up after this.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Esmel Meeks, we'll utilize print advertising to comply with our statutory requirements to maximize resources, But also, we are working on a comprehensive marketing strategy, which we will send to staff for approval and then to the commission, which will include a focus on increasing reach and encouraging input to utilize Facebook, Instagram stories, Google search, and programmatic displays. When utilizing Facebook Live videos and YouTube videos, we have the opportunity to push out messages to listeners, to encourage them to go to the website, to add comments, but also to share maps. And as we mentioned, we will target historically underrepresented and disadvantaged communities. And we would hope to have that budget to you by next week, so long as staff approves.
Okay. Mindy, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mindy Carlin. So just to wrap up, efforts underway and next steps. So we are finalizing the data fields. Thank you for the input there for the data management platform, and we'll prepare to upload input received to date. We will work with staff to implement recommended website updates, optimization, and improvements. As Mel mentioned, we are in the process of having digital and print media content developed. We're reaching out to potential outreach partner contacts and preparing our comprehensive list of outreach contacts. So again, feedback welcome there. We are preparing for the upcoming public meetings, understanding that the dates have shifted a bit, but much of our outreach will focus on those. And then we'll be providing regular weekly updates on our progress that can be shared with the commission for your information. So you're aware of what we're doing and can provide any comments. We'll be doing that in writing, but certainly can be available at meetings as well.
Thank you so much, Mindy and Esmail. I think that's great. And I'm sure we'll get some comments from the public that they wish we had been able to do this sooner. But at this point, I think it is what it is. And we're excited to see the content that you all develop and the outreach and the data management. Are there questions from any commission members for the presentation you just heard? Okay, all right. So, I'm sorry.
Mindy, it was Mindy.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yes.
I'll just say members of the public can be assured that if they have provided input to date, that input will be a part of what we organize and provide to commission members. So just because it hasn't been kind of organized yet, it will be, and no public input will be missed. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate it, and we are grateful that you guys are part of our team now, and look forward to seeing tangible progress in the ensuing days and weeks. Okay, our next presenter is Dr. Max Palmer, who I'm looking on the screen here. Are you here, Dr. Palmer?
Yep.
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
here.
There you go. Sorry. Welcome. And you are going to give us a presentation on racially polarized voting analysis that you've conducted for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we're really looking forward to hearing your presentation. And I'll turn the screen over to you. And if you have something that you want to share, that's great.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just share my slides here. All right. Thank you. So this analysis was conducted with my colleague, Benjamin Schneer, who's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. I'm an associate professor of political science at Boston University. And I was asked to analyze racially polarized voting across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Very briefly, before I turn to the results, what is racially polarized voting? Racially polarized voting, which we abbreviate to RPV, occurs when the majority group, in this case white voters in Virginia, and a minority group, whether African American, Hispanic, Asian voters, or minority voters collectively, vote differently. That is, prefer different candidates in a consistent way. And I'll leave sort of the legal test to the lawyers here, but generally we reduce it down to two different parts. First is the minority group that we're interested in politically cohesive. That is, do large majorities of that group vote together for the same candidates? And then second, if that first condition is met, does the majority group also vote cohesively as a bloc in opposition to the minority's preferred candidate? So I often think about these analyses as having two steps. First, looking at the minority group that I'm interested in. Are they cohesive? Do they have a clear candidate of choice? And then second, do white voters oppose that candidate of choice? One important note is that finding racially polarized voting does not mean that there's any sort of discriminatory intent on the part of voters or candidates or map drawers. We're not trying to explain why people vote the way they do, just trying to understand the patterns of voting. And we have to estimate racially polarized voting using some statistical techniques. And I'm going to use one here called ecological inference, or EI. And the reason we have to do this is we have the secret ballot. So we can't see how individual people vote. If we did, this would be a much easier problem. Instead, we have to use aggregate data. So data about the population of voters in each precinct, and then data about the votes cast in each precinct to estimate voting patterns. So I'm going to show you a couple results, and then there's a lot more in the report as well. First, statewide, looking across the entire Commonwealth, we see evidence of racially polarized voting across several recent statewide elections. And here I'm looking at the 2016 presidential, 2017 attorney general, governor, and lieutenant governor, and 2018 US Senate races. And we see a very consistent pattern. And so this kind of chart appears in several places in the report. And there's a couple different pieces of information here. First, we have a dot for each election for each group. And here I'm splitting out Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white voters as 4 separate groups, which I can do in the statewide analyses. And the dot represents our average or best estimate for the percentage of that group voting for the Democratic candidate in each election. And so we see very high percentages of Asian, Black, and slightly lower, but still larger numbers of Hispanic voters voting for the Democratic candidate in all 5 elections. And that's over here on the right. On the left, we see these same dots here for white voters below the 50% mark, generally in the mid-30s, though a little bit higher in this 2018 US Senate race. So that is evidence of cohesion among Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters, large majorities for all 3 groups voting for Democratic candidates, having a clear candidate of choice. And then opposition to that candidate from white voters. Now, on either side of each dot is a horizontal line. And the width of that line is going to vary across elections, across racial groups. It's relatively small here for white voters. And that line represents a 95% confidence interval. And you can think of that as an estimate of statistical uncertainty or noise. Because it's an estimate, because we're using statistics, we don't have the exact value, but rather both a best estimate and then a degree of confidence in it. So the true value might be somewhere along this line. Instead, the dot is, we think, the most likely point. So we can think of these lines as a measure of uncertainty. And you'll see in some of the other analyses where you get down to much smaller geographies, like a House of Delegates district, that in some places we get really wide confidence intervals. We can't draw a clear conclusion because of the limited data available to us. Any questions on that chart before I go to the next type of result?
So Dr. Palmer, if the line, the horizontal line is shorter, that means you're very confident. Is that right? The longer the line, the more flex is in that where that dot is located.
Yes, that's a good summary of it. When it's narrower, we have more certainty. What's important to note here, though, is even for, say, Hispanic voters in these elections, where we have a wider confidence interval, even that lower bound, even our lowest estimate is still well above 75%. So even though we have uncertainty there, it doesn't actually affect the conclusions that we draw from the analysis. If, on the other hand, the line was so wide that it spanned 50%, then we would have a hard time saying that a majority of Hispanic voters supported the Democratic candidate. All right, so another kind of result you'll see in the report are a bunch of pairs of maps. And I'm just going to show you one example here, and these are regional maps. There's also maps by congressional district, by state Senate district, and House of Delegates district as well. And the idea for these maps is letting us see some of the regional variation in racially polarized voting. And one thing that's really important about this analysis is that even though we see RPV statewide, there's a lot of variation across the state of Virginia. So each map is in a pair, first for minority voters and then for white voters. And for these analyses, because we're looking at smaller geographies and to make presenting the results simpler, I'm combining all of the minority groups into one group for these estimates. So this includes African American voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, everybody who's except for non-Hispanic white voters. So the first thing to take away from the left-hand map.
Excuse me, Dr. Palmer, 1 second. Can I ask all members to please mute their phone? Please mute your phone so that we can all hear. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you. So the left-hand map for minority voters is consistently blue. And one note, there's some districts or areas we're leaving out that are marked in gray because the non-white populations in these areas are so small. We can't get accurate estimates, and so we leave those out. But everywhere else we see, it's consistently dark blue, suggesting that over 70% of minority voters in these regions are voting for Democrats. Not much that's interesting to see in this map. On the other hand, on the right, for white voters, we see a lot of variation here. We see the level of support for Democrats for the minority preferred candidate varies a lot across these districts. And I'm using the regions defined by the Commission for your public hearings or public meetings. In Eastern Virginia and South Side, we see a very low share of white voters supporting the Democratic candidate, less than 30%. In the Valley, West Central, and Hampton Roads regions, we see 30 to 40%. In the Central region, we see 40 to 50%. And in the Northern region, 50 to 60%. And that Northern region is most significant because it shows that there's not racially polarized voting overall on average in this region. That is, we expect a majority of white voters are also supporting the minority voters candidate of choice, the Democratic candidates in these elections. In the Central region, we see that even though a majority isn't supporting the minority candidate of choice, it's not extremely polarized, right? It's close to being split, 40 to 50% of white voters supporting the minority candidate of choice here. So there's a lot of other maps in the report, all following this exact same format. First showing the general lack of variation among minority voters, and then showing variation across geographies for white voters. Any questions there? All right, and then I'll turn just to one last quick slide here showing another way of looking at variation here, looking across congressional districts. And I provide these plots in the report just for districts with substantial minority populations, but there's also a full data appendix that has it for every single district and not just the ones graphed here and in the report. And so what this plot shows is the same format. We have red dots in this case for white voters with their confidence intervals, blue dots for minority voters with their confidence intervals. We see these intervals are a little bit wider here because we're looking at congressional districts. Each one is much smaller than looking at the state as a whole, so we have less data available in our estimates. And we see a lot of variation across these 5 districts. In the 8th district, we see a large majority of minority voters supporting the Democratic candidate and a pretty large majority of white voters as well. And in fact, these confidence intervals overlap. And roughly speaking, that suggests that we're not even sure that those levels of support are different in that district. It could be that the true values are here and here for both groups. In the 11th district, we still see a majority of white voters supporting the Democratic candidate or the minority candidate of choice. And even though these intervals don't overlap, we still see majorities for both groups, and that suggests a lack of racially polarized voting. On the other hand, in the 10th, 4th, and 3rd districts, we see a majority of white voters supporting the Republican candidate or voting against the minority candidate of choice, suggesting racially polarized voting, but with some variation in, or potential variation in the level of support. So these plots are useful for seeing places where there isn't racially polarized voting, where there is racially polarized voting, or where we might have some uncertainty about whether RPV exists or not in this place. And then one last note, I mentioned that in addition to the PDF report, we provided an Excel spreadsheet with all of our results. So for every individual election and for every geography that we looked at, we present the full results there. So if you wanted to look up the exact numbers for each of these points, or for the confidence intervals, or for a geography that we didn't show in the report, you can find that in that Excel appendix.
So Dr. Palmer, before you move off of that slide, so again, I'm trying to make sure that I'm fully understanding the impact of your analysis. So for District 8, you would say there's not racially polarized voting, a pattern of that, and that would be a district that is pretty balanced and fair, whereas some of the other districts with a wider margin between minority and white voters, that potentially would indicate that there's work to be done to more equitably balance the voting patterns in that district.
I don't think that's quite right. I don't think we're saying anything about, we're not saying anything about fairness or about equity here. We're purely describing the rates at which these groups vote for different candidates. So so District 8, we can learn from here, is a district where Democrats are winning by very large margins because voters of all groups are supporting the Democratic candidate. In contrast, in a different district with polarized voting, just from this alone, I can't say who's winning. I can simply say that majorities of each group are supporting different candidates. You can have a minority opportunity district where white voters support that minority candidate of choice. You can also have minority opportunity districts with racially polarized voting. It really depends on the percentage of voters or the percentage of the population of each group.
Okay, so I know our attorneys strongly recommended that we do this analysis and maybe looking at Mr. Hebert or Mr. Some of the other lawyers to help us in layman's terms. What is this information telling us? I'd like to make sure that I'm fully understanding the analysis to help inform our decision making as we go forward with drawing new maps.
I'll go first, Madam Chair. This is Jerry Hebert.
Thank you.
I think overall, what charts like this one shows is that in terms of racially polarized voting, in District 8 and 11, a majority of both white voters and minority voters are supporting the same candidate. By contrast, in Districts 3, 4, and 10, a minority of whites are supporting Democratic candidates, and some of those candidates are candidates who represent minority opportunity districts. So in order to calibrate newly drawn 3, 4, and 10, you would have to take into account the fact that there is a racially polarized electorate within that district. And so therefore, when you draw that district, you'll need to calculate out what percentage of minority voters are necessary in that district if you wish to preserve that district as a minority opportunity district. Does that help?
I think so. I may be the only one that's sort of struggling to align that information, but I'll keep working on that. Are there other legal council members that have additional comments on the RPV analysis?
Madam Chair, this is Kareem Creighton.
Yes, sir.
I would just emphasize for members who are looking at this for the first time, I think Professor Palmer mentioned it in passing. I just wanted to emphasize that the point of the analysis is less focused on the fact that it is a Democratic or Republican candidate, but the preferred candidate of the racial minority group, which is really what the law requires attention to. This is a convenient way of thinking about the comparison, of course, as to whether or not white and people of color or communities of color, where those voters are either cooperating or not. As Mr. Hebert just said, thinking about what the construction of a district will do for minority political opportunity. But the import of all of this was to look at the candidates that the communities that are protected by the Voting Rights Act, what they want, and determining whether or not the expressed interest of what they prefer in terms of candidates are agreed to in large part or not by white voters in general. So what you do with that information, as has been said, really is up to you about how a district configuration will or will not take account of those minority interests. And we can talk a little bit, as you go forward about the likely consequence of that with respect to the law. But ultimately, the read of this is a descriptive statement about where the communities across the state are with respect to an agreement in general between minority voters and, I should say, people of color, because they may not be the minority in certain parts of the state, people of color and white voters in terms of choosing candidates in elections across the state.
Brian or Chris?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, thank you. I think Jerry and Kareem have done a very good job summarizing the issue. I mean, I will say that there, in other voting rights cases, I litigate the question of whether you're seeing partisan polarization and or racial polarization, and what that means is a topic of conversation. But as the law stands right now, the fact that racial polarization exists is the only way that you can then take into account race to draw remedial districts under Section 2, where the minority community has the ability to elect its candidates of choice. So the existence of racially polarized voting is critical to the process of how you're going to draw areas where there are racial minorities, because it informs the amount of crossover voting and the ability to elect level that is necessary here. So again, I agree with Kareem in terms of the language. Obviously, nowadays we tend to think a lot more in partisan terms, and I think when a lot of these tests were first developed in the 80s, there was a difference of kind of how the electorate looked in terms of the racial makeup of the various parties. That's changed some today, but that is the state of the law as it stands now. So y'all will need to have this information as you look at drawing.
Okay, all right.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, yes, Delegate McQuinn.
Okay, so I guess I just understanding this, I guess to a greater degree. So the only variables that we're using to quantify this is whether it's a minority voter or a white voter. I mean, there's a lot of things that make up, and for the most part, we know that African Americans historically vote at a certain period anyway, vote Democratic, a Democratic ticket for a Democrat. So I guess nothing else is considered. I think one of the attorneys talk about partisan. Now, the issue of apathy, the issue of gentrification. So, and I guess there are a lot of other issues as we look at trying to draw these maps and how communities are going to be affected. But I guess what I'm hearing as you look at RPV, as it varies across Virginia, the only thing that we're giving consideration as it relates to this is the minority white voter, and if it's polarized based on that. And I guess there was I don't know if it was a comment or question, or if you understand what I'm saying. Can someone speak to that? Yes.
Okay. Well, and I think that this is on historical data, looking at, voting patterns to date. So it's not necessarily looking at current conditions in certain communities and changes that are going on, but I'm still learning and really trying to interpret this. So I see Delegate Simon and then Senator Barker.
Thank you. I think we're probably going to both make a similar point. We'll see. I hear Mr. Tyson saying that sometimes we are seeing is partisan polarization versus racial polarization. We did litigate that issue a bit in 2018 and 19, and as he said, the state of the law is we still look at this as racial polarization. But I think the way that the commission needs to view this is just information to use to apply to ensure that we're meeting our criteria number 2B, right, which says that every electoral district shall be drawn in accordance with the requirements of federal and state laws that address racial and ethnic fairness. And skipping down to the last sentence, districts shall provide, where practicable, opportunities for racial and ethnic communities to elect candidates of their choice, right? So to be able to meet that criteria, it's important for us to understand where it is that if we break up, for instance, an African-American community into too small of a piece of that district, what we've effectively done is because in that area, choice of candidate seems to follow race very closely. You want to be extra careful not to break up a racial community to the point that you dilute their ability to select their person of choice. At the same time, you don't want to pack in so many members of a particular ethnic group because it has the effect, as we've seen from that backward-looking look, of limiting folks near them from being able to select the person of their choice. This is just a tool. It's just information to have so that we can be assured when we go into this and not wait for the litigation to come up to tell us we were wrong, that we've met our criteria to be at. That's how I understand this information. And I'm happy to defer to some of the others who've got some more experience with this.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Simon. Senator Barker and then Senator Locke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with the comments of Delegate Simon. I think this is one of the things that is at the top of the list of what's important in our drawing these districts this next month or so. And I think part of what makes it so important is that in the last decade, we had 3 maps that were drawn, and 2 of those 3 maps, the one for the congressional districts and the one for the House of Delegates districts, were thrown out by the federal courts on the basis of racial gerrymandering. And it wasn't that the tool was not applied, it was how it was applied and what the assumptions were built in that led to drawing of districts that were determined to have the problems that Delegate Simon was talking about, both packing and cracking the districts that where African Americans in particular were impacted. And we had in 2015, we had a very brief special session to draw new congressional districts, but ended up being done by the court rather than the General Assembly, resolving that issue. And the impetus for it largely came, and Senator Locke may talk about it a good bit because she was heavily involved in things. But it was Congressman Bobby Scott was the only African American congressman that we had had, at least in this past century. So that there were, and he led the charge to say we are disenfranchising African American voters when we're putting too many into one district, and therefore not allowing other African Americans to have the same level of influence in the surrounding area. And that's what led then to the court drawing District 4, redrawing District 4, which is now represented by Congressman McEachin, and resolved, and moved us in that direction. And then, what Delegate Simon was talking about with what happened in the House of Delegates in 2018 and 2019, which led to, again, significant shifts, certain districts. And those were basically all in the Hampton Roads to Richmond area where those were in place. The only one that was outside of that was a little bit on South Side with Delegate Tyler's district, which actually got removed from the court case because it was determined by the court that just as the Professor Palmer's analysis has shown, there is a wider disparity between African American and white voters in Southside than there is in the Central Virginia, Richmond area, and than there is in Hampton Roads. And that was then a basis for having a higher threshold there. What would be particularly interesting to me is that what levels might be suggested as reasonable levels, so we don't end up on the short end of a federal court case again this decade with the districts that we're going to be coming up with. When I worked on putting out a proposed map for the congressional districts in 2015, it wasn't adopted, obviously, but we did do that, and we did consult with a racially polarized voter analyst to review that. And what she concluded was that in the area from Hampton Roads to Richmond, including a little bit of Southside in there, that she did not find any place in there where you needed more than 40% African Americans to be able to control the outcome. And in many cases, it was in the low 30s of the percentage points that were needed. So that would be helpful if anyone has any perspective on that and how we get to those determinations now.
So Senator Barker, just one follow-up question. So as we're proposing new district lines for any of the maps, do we come back and run the same type of analysis as we're going through the map drawing? Or is this just historical information and then we draw new district lines and then rerun this analysis to see if we aren't having the polarization?
Well,
I think
it's
a tool to inform going
forward.
forward.
I think it's a little more than a tool to inform. I think it is
Okay.
it clearly is a tool to inform, but we need to move beyond that and figure out what types of standards are we going to apply and how are we going to analyze the data. And with what's being loaded into the computer right now, as I understand it, we're in a situation where we should soon have all the election data, not just the 3 years that Professor Palmer used, which was 2016, 2017, and 2018, which were the most recent legitimate types of data that we had on elections of statewide candidates in Virginia, but it even went back to 2012, 2013, and 2014 as well. And what we need to do is to be able to make some judgments, whether there's going to be specific numbers, whether it's going to be looking at those districts, and based upon the data that we will have there, we may be able to make those judgments without having to resort to a specific number in each particular case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Senator Locke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Barker covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted some clarity on one issue, and Mr. Tyson mentioned Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and that is specifically what role will Section 2 play as we move through the map-making process, and how do we go about ensuring that districts will not be overpacked, and at the same time ensuring that minority candidates will have the opportunity to elect candidates of choice.
Mr. Tyson, do you want to respond? And Mr. Hebert, I maybe saw your hand come up. Okay, so let's hear from Brian and then Jerry. Brian, we can't hear you.
And there, I'm sorry.
There you go. No
I apologize. It broke up on me a little bit. I didn't hear the question. So is there, I apologize, Senator.
I asked about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and what role that will play in the map-making process, and can we be assured that districts don't get, or in the map-making process, districts do not get packed?
Yes, definitely. And so the racial polarization analysis is a key part of that because it tells you kind of what your ability to elect number is and making sure that you're not drawing districts that are too high. For example, if you're in an area of extreme racial polarization with very little white crossover voting, you may be in a situation where you need a 55 or 60% minority district of a particular racial group to elect a candidate of choice because of low turnout, because of lack of white crossover voting, versus an area where there may be a higher percentage of voter turnout, a higher percentage of white crossover voting, where you don't need a district that's quite that high.
We lost you
And
again.
so it's not.
Go ahead, Brian. Okay,
you
you're
hear me
back
now?
on now.
I'm sorry. Okay. Apologize. So it's a very fact-intensive analysis and a district-by-district analysis. It's not like you can pick a magic number and say, if we draw above this number, we're packing, and if we draw below this number, we're not. But that's part of why Dr. Palmer has done this analysis to help us assess the racial polarization issues going into the drawing process to assure ourselves that we're not packing or cracking and drawing ability to elect districts that are required by Section 2.
Thank you. Jerry?
I think the same as Brian's just reported, but let me give you a couple of examples because Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act obviously plays a major factor in how to craft and protect minority opportunity districts. And I'm going to give you an example of how this analysis that Dr. Palmer has come up with can be used to provide a strong basis and evidence for maintaining a district where appropriate for minority voters to elect their preferred candidate. So let's assume just hypothetically that a district, congressional district has 1 million people. And in that current 1 million person district, 600,000 of those persons are African Americans and 400,000 are whites. Now, if you take Dr. Palmer's analysis and you were to look and see that in that district, 90% of Black voters, African American voters, are voting for what turns out to be a Black candidate, whether assuming it's a Democrat in this instance. And then let's assume that only 20% of the whites of the 400,000 vote for the Black candidate or the Democratic candidate. So if you look at those percentages of racially polarized voting, 90% of the 600,000 Black voters, that would be 540,000 people. And 20% of the 400,000, which are the whites, well, that's another 80,000. So if you add those two together, you have 620,000. So you kind of know, based on the racial polarization, whether or not Black voters are going to be able to continue to elect their candidates of choice. Similarly, if you have a district right now that's 500 Black, 500 white, and 90% of the Blacks vote for the Black candidate, and 30% of the whites in the 500,000 vote for the Black candidate, that's 150,000. Well, then you've got 450 Blacks voting and 150,000 whites voting for the Black candidate of choice. That's 600,000. So you can use these figures to gauge what percentage is needed in the district, as Mr. Tyson has said, to maintain an opportunity for Black voters to elect their preferred candidates. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said that if you're going to take race into account to maintain these districts or draw districts, you have to have a strong basis and evidence for doing so. And racially polarized voting analysis provides that strong basis and evidence.
And Jerry, as the map drawing process is evolving, do you go back and test when you draw one district one way versus another way? Did you go back and try to rerun this in the map drawing process, or it just makes you more sensitive as you're starting to make adjustments to the lines?
You actually, when you draw a new district, you will actually have election data and you will have racially polarized data that fit in that particular area.
Gotcha.
And you can determine at that point how to calibrate.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Are there other questions that members have on the data that Dr. Palmer provided. And I will say that I think email from the DLS staff is the full report that has a lot of information in there with specificity on the different, I guess, House, Senate, and congressional maps that you can take a look at, and hopefully will be part of our analysis. Senator Barker, is your hand up again? Yes, there you go.
Yes,
yes, sir.
yes, my hand is up again. So I just wanted to say that I think that this issue is so important to us in Virginia because of our history, not just lengthy history, but recent history. And this analysis confirms that it's still relevant, by and large, at least in most parts of the Commonwealth. I think it's important enough that we need to make sure that in terms of efforts to draw districts, that we start by looking for opportunities to be able to draw districts that are more responsive to the African American population in particular here, but a minority population in aggregate, to be able to make sure that we are covering all our bases. Right now, based upon what we did in 2011, in the state Senate districts, there are 5 out of the 40 that are qualified as places where African Americans can control the outcome if they're united behind a particular candidate. I've done some running of numbers and looked at maps and things just in the last few days, and I'm confident that we could go from 5 to at least 7 of those. By right now, we have 2 in the Richmond area, 3 in the Hampton Roads area, with one of those 3 extended into part of South Side. But we could actually keep the 3 focused on the Hampton Roads area, draw another district in South Side, and it would, as Professor Palmer and Brian and everybody have pointed out, you have to have a higher percentage there because of the disparity between the voting patterns there is so high. But it's possible to have a draw district that would go from Southampton and the city of Franklin along the North Carolina border all the way to Danville. That would, for example, would be one that then would qualify here. And also, by removing of the 2 that are in Richmond, one of those you could split and have the eastern half of Henrico County be a focal point of one district, which would be an additional one to the 2 that we already have there. And so I think it's that we have the opportunity to go from 5 to 7 and basically demonstrate very clearly that we are being responsive to minority and particularly African American voters, and minimize the chance we end up in court on the losing end of something this go around. And I'd be happy to help out in any way I could on that issue.
Yep, I think we're all anxious to jump in and leverage your knowledge as we go forward. Senator McDougal, I think you have your hand up.
I do, Madam Chairman. I just want to point out to my good friend, Senator Barker, that not all of those districts in the Richmond area are actually represented by African Americans. So even though they might have been drawn to be represented by African Americans, and one was up until recently, they are not now all currently represented by African Americans.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I might respond just very briefly.
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with what Senator McDougal said. And, we do have Senator Morrissey and Delegate Carr, both of whom represent districts that qualify there. But the important thing to recognize, and he rightly pointed it out, it's not drawing it to elect Blacks or other specific people, or people from other specific groups to the seat, but to allow the voters to be able to make that choice and have the African American voters be able to choose a Roslyn dance one time, and then the next time we'll go around choose Joe Morrissey.
Okay, before I go to Dr. Palmer, are there any other questions or comments from commission members on this analysis. And I would encourage all members to read the full report now that we have a better understanding of how to understand what the report is stating. Virginia, you have your hand up?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Okay, Virginia, you're going in and out on the audio. We can't hear you. Okay, I think she dropped off the screen. She may pop back on again. So Dr. Palmer, any closing remarks? Is maybe you can stop sharing for a second, and any more closing remarks on your work?
That's all I have for you for today. As you mentioned in the report, there's a lot of analyses breaking things down by the different district types, also by localities, highlighting some of the larger cities and counties. There's also a little bit of analysis of the 2020 election, which is very limited because of absentee voting is only reported at the locality level. And so we don't have good precinct level data for 2020 the way we do for earlier years. And there's also a little analysis of the 2017 Democratic primary for lieutenant governor, looking at registered voters voting in that particular primary election as well. So a lot of useful analyses in that report as you proceed with the map drawing.
Well, thank you so much for your work.
James Abrino here.
Yes, sir, James.
I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint, because the evaluation is great. I appreciate this. I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint. I assume that Dr. Palmer is going to be available whenever we have proposed maps, as well as the attorneys to help us interpret, as we're drawing these districts, to give us feedback to make sure that essentially we're not doing anything to violate the law, and essentially flag things for us. And kind of an analogy I would think of in my criminal practice, sometimes when I'm considering pleas for clients, if they're not U.S. citizens, I have an immigration attorney to help me understand that area of law that may affect what's going on. So I assume that Dr. Palmer would essentially be there to help make sure we're not violating the law, and as well as the attorneys. Is that how that's going to work from a practical standpoint?
I'll let maybe the attorneys try to answer that. I'm not 100% sure how much we're engaging Dr. Palmer on a go-forward basis. Again, he was doing analysis on our historical voting patterns, but I think as we draw new district lines, that there will be, with the software package that we're using, that we'll be able to test, I guess, some of the balance of the makeup of that district. I'm not 100% sure on that. Jerry, I see you took yourself off of mute there.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Jerry Hebert. Mr. Abrenio's question, first of all, Dr. Palmer would be the first to say that he really can't provide a legal conclusion. But having said that, what he might be able to do if asked was to look at a particular district that has been drawn to provide minority voters with an opportunity to elect their candidate of choice, and to do a statistical view of that district in terms of the degree to which voting is racially polarized within that district, if he can do that, and also to look at reconstituted election returns, which can also be very valuable in determining whether minority voters are going to be able to continue to elect, say, in a particular district. Does that help?
That does help. And again, really, I'm just looking for a practical level. As far as making those requests, would it be you, the attorneys, that say, hey, Doc, we need some more guidance here? Or is it going to be us making those requests? Or is it just we're going to see how it goes?
I think that, that's really up to the commission to decide what the process would be. But I can tell you that the data that Dr. Palmer has given us, and he's looked at the most recent elections, which are the most probative, frankly, on the issue of racially polarized voting, that we can actually take those data and come out with a particular estimate of how that district is going to perform in the future. And I would only go to Dr. Palmer if I, in looking at his data, had a question about not being able to apply it, or maybe it was a gray area, and what did he think? And I think, I'm not speaking for him, but I know that that he would want to share his expertise with us if we needed it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hebert and Dr. Palmer.
And Brian, looks like you came off mute as well.
Yes, Madam Chair. I was just going to add very briefly too that one of the main uses. So, for example, we're going to talk about kind of Northern Virginia today and Fairfax area. In Dr. Palmer's report, for example, he determines there really isn't racially polarized voting going on in that part of the state. And so then that informs, do we need to draw remedial districts for Voting Rights Act purposes there? And if there's not racially polarized voting, then we don't need to do that. We don't consider that. And so that's the biggest use. And I agree with everything Jerry said in terms of looking back at additional election results as we need those. But I think that's the most important use of the report, is recognizing where the Voting Rights Act is going to require the drawing of majority-minority districts or ability to elect districts in those parts of the state.
Thank you very much. Mr. Harrell, you have your hand up?
Yes, Madam Chair. I've got a question for Brian also. Brian, as I understand our directives in terms of what we're supposed to follow, there are a number of different very important issues, critical issues, such as compactness and contiguous and other items, although racial opportunity voting, or however you want to describe it, is extremely important from the U.S. Constitution. It bothers me to think that we're going to distort our maps to go all the way from Chesapeake to Danville, which is 200 miles and can be over 200 miles, half the state, in order to meet just one of these requirements. Aren't the other requirements also important?
So you're exactly right that the requirements are all important. The thing to keep in mind is that your Voting Rights Act compliance that takes precedence over your traditional principles of redistricting. It's the second most important thing after the constitutional requirements of equal population. And when you have a situation where there's disparate communities, the other requirement, in addition to kind of racial polarization, as we call it, is that the minority community be geographically compact and to be able to constitute the majority in a single district. And so there is some precedent from the U.S. Supreme Court that says if you're reaching out across the state and grabbing minority population from one part or from the other part, due solely to the fact that they're of the same race, that's problematic from a constitutional perspective. And so there still needs to be some connection with the community, some commonality of interest. And so as the drawing process goes along, those are things we'll consider, but your Voting Rights Act compliance is going to be very important, relative, and more important than your other traditional principles of redistricting.
Thanks.
Dr. Creighton?
I wanted to add one thing that to Brian's point that ties in, I think, to a couple of other questions that have come up, and that is sort of the how of this, like what to do with this information. And I think, it's been rightly said that there's going to be some moments where you maybe look back to this analysis and sort of figure out what configuration of a district, or perhaps where the district goes that might meet the consideration for minority political opportunity. It's also important to see that this is also a place where some of the public testimony that you'll look at and receive can play a role in sort of shaping how you think about what is a district that meets those criteria. Brian's absolutely right about the other consideration. You don't want to take race too much into account at the sort of sacrifice of other traditional principles. At the same time, you don't want to fail to do it enough. And that's sort of where this information can be really helpful at striking the right balance.
Thank you, Dr. Creighton. I'm going to circle back to Virginia Thornton. We had some audio problems. Virginia, if you're still there, do you want to make your comment or ask a question?
No, I just wanted to comment the fact that I have been on board since the beginning. I've had audio difficulties. Didn't want you to think I was not present.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We're glad
I've enjoyed
that
the information.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Mhm.
Okay. Well, Dr. Palmer, thank you so much for your analyses. We're grateful for that, and we'll be using that to help inform our work going forward. So, and don't be surprised if we circle back around to you. So, thank you so much. I think, thank you. I'm very excited, in addition to our previous presentations, to now welcome John Morgan and Ken Strassma, who are part of our map drawing teams. The co-chairs, DLS staff, our legal counsel, and met with the map drawers, I'm trying to think, a few days ago. And we are under an incredibly tight timeline to be able to get, we're tackling the state House and Senate maps first. And with advice from council, the co-chairs encouraged in a very short period of time the map drawers to take Northern Virginia, which is where we have, I guess, huge population centers, to be able to start there. And then what we're looking to do, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about our meeting cadence for the next couple of months, is we've been working through public hearings, as well as just trying to bifurcate the state into more manageable sections by using 8 regions. And I think what we're looking to do over the next 4 weeks is to really present 2 regions per week that will be using our criteria. Maps will be presented. We'll have a chance to ask questions, make suggestions, think about it, and then we'll come back later on that week to vote on maps. And we'll do it sort of in sections of the state, and work that way. Julie Smith is available to help individual members if, after sorting through data and citizen suggested maps, we can draw our own maps with Julie and then submit that to the map drawers as well. So we'll talk more about our actual process as to how we're going to do this. But right now, I think John and Ken are going to be presenting the first take on what new Northern Virginia maps may look like. And so I welcome the 2 of you here. And if you have a presentation that you want to share with us, we're excited to see your first ideas out of the gate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say, since we have limited time here, perhaps the commission would like to subdivide the time. We have 2 maps for each side, so that's 4 maps to consider. So my recommendation would be to try to subdivide the time as you see fit.
Okay, so we have quite a few people that have signed up to speak. So let's say a little over an hour. And then we also have to talk about our calendars. So I would say if we can try to limit it to 10 minutes per map, so present, and then I'm sure you'll get comments, and we'll try it like that. So that gives us 40 minutes to be able to get through this. What do you think, John?
That sounds reasonable given the circumstances. I'm sure it's possible that there could be more than 10 minutes of questions.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Again, that sounds like a good way to handle it. 4 maps, 40 minutes.
Okay. And so who's going to be presenting the first map?
So Madam Chair, I was going to offer, if no one has a strong preference, that we could go first, because part of our presentation is going to be talking about data issues. Which tie very much into the RPV discussion we've just had. So while it's still fresh in people's minds, but I will keep the 20-minute total time for our presentation in mind. I was going to talk about the data issues and proposed schedule, and then handle over to my colleague Zach Combs for an actual walkthrough of the maps.
Okay.
Fortunately, the Northern Virginia is probably the least controversial area of the state, fairly easy. So we can go through these maps probably a lot quicker than will be the case in other parts. So if that's acceptable to you,
that's fine, I think.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will share my screen.
Chair, we're waiting for that to come up.
Yes, Delegate Simon.
This won't be the last discussion we have of these maps. I mean, we did spend about 40 minutes on one of our slides here today, and so 40 minutes on these maps. I think this is just to give us an introduction.
It is an introduction.
So the danger of putting these maps out, of course, is people start to get attached to them, and so I just want people to know these are. My understanding, these are very preliminary drafts. Is that right?
They are. They are. Okay.
Are people able to see my screen?
Yes.
Virginia map drawing update. Okay, so we propose to talk about data issues, proposed schedule, and then just walk through the maps that we drew this week. On the data issues, I apologize that we are going over some ground that I know the commission has already discussed. We only got our hands on the data this past Tuesday. As it's been pointed out, this is a bit of a time scramble. But I do think it's very relevant now because it ties in so closely to the RPV analysis that we've been talking about. So I thought it would be worth highlighting. So the first issue is that the presidential 2020 results are not usable in their current format, as was pointed out before, because the absentee vote is reported at the locality level rather than at the precinct or BTD level. The data that is uploaded into Maptitude actually shows Trump getting 63% of the vote in the state, as opposed to the actual results of 55 Biden, 45 for Trump. So obviously that data could not be used as is in an RPV analysis. The simple solution to that is, okay, let's go back in time. But then we run into the issue of precinct lines having changed, lines and numbers. So you'll hear very often the terminology VTD, voting tabulation district, which is how the census reports these. Those lines have changed. That was also flagged by the people who were working on preparing the data. And big shout out and thanks to the people at Legislative Services who were helping us through all of this and flagged that they were well aware of these issues. The issues were not a significant problem for the first region because, as Dr. Palmer pointed out, there isn't that much racially polarized voting in Northern Virginia. It's a very solidly Democratic area, so it doesn't come into play as much. But it's likely to be much more important later on in the process as we get to the political neutrality criterion and also as we do district-specific RPV analysis. So there are a number of possible solutions. Autobound is aware of and is working on the VTD line change and name change issues, but does not expect to have an update for at least 2 weeks. The major mapping software companies were all waiting for months, just like the rest of us, for the census data to come out. And they have clients in all 50 states that are clamoring for their attention. So they are completely swamped. There are also various nonpartisan academic organizations that have done a lot of work processing VTD line changes over the last couple of years. We're in the process of doing quality assurance checks on some of that data. I think it's quite likely that we are going to be able to have, at least back through 2016, reliable maps of the precincts as they existed in those years that we can then use to disaggregate election results to the block level. That's the process where we look at what percentage of the voting age population in a precinct comes from a particular block, and then we allocate that same percentage of the votes to that block. That then allows us to add up from that block to propose new districts and to the VTDs as they exist in 2020. So that's the best way of dealing with the fact that these precinct lines are not the same as they were in 2016. A similar but slightly more complicated process can happen with the 2020 absentee votes. We have the absentee votes by locality. There's a couple of different approaches that various groups have discussed. Probably the most accurate but most time-consuming would be to take voter file information where individuals are flagged as to whether or not they voted absentee. And then that way we could do counts from each precinct of how many people did vote absentee and allocate that share of the locality-wide absentee vote. We also do need to look at partisan skew by different precincts. A quicker approach would be to take what share of the Democratic vote in the locality that was cast at the polls came from each precinct, and then give them that same share of the Democratic vote, and we would do the same with the Republican vote. Both of these are, by nature estimates, as Dr. Palmer, pointed out a couple times. We have the secret ballot, which makes it impossible to know for sure how different people voted. I would, though, reassure people the total vote would still stay the same. It's not like we would be doing any estimate that would change the number of votes that were cast for Biden or for Trump. It's just a question of what is our best way of estimating from what precincts within a locality those votes came from. And as I said, we are continuing to research that and hope to have a more detailed recommendation for an approach to take by the time we get into areas of the state where that would be more of an issue.
Can you back up just one quick slide there? Does the absentee ballots, the third bullet, does that's just absentee? It's not early voting ballots, right?
Well, actually, using that as a catch-all for mail absentee early voting.
Oh, really?
Anything that's reported at the locality level.
Okay.
And the issue, as everyone is well aware of from watching the election results come in, vastly more people were voting in any method other than at the polls this time around.
Okay.
And not to get too much into the weeds, but another thing we're looking at, we have considerable survey data about concerns about COVID. And the more people were concerned about COVID, the more likely they were to vote by an alternate method. And those concerns are not uniform across all demographics.
Okay. And so is bullet 2 an alternate strategy from waiting 2 weeks from the Autobahn realignment on
Yes.
on the okay.
Yes, we're hoping that in about 1 week we can have usable election data at the VTD level for 2016 and 2018.
Right.
When the Autobahn has done their process, we'd of course want to compare it. We want to make sure that everyone's talking apples and apples and that we don't have competing data sets.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm trying to be aware of our time here, so I'll quickly discuss our proposed schedule. I know this obviously is the commission's call, but I just wanted to put something out there so we can try to know what our marching orders are for the weeks to follow. We do have a very tight timeline of 4 weeks to try to get 8 regions done. I'm largely agnostic as to regions. I don't think it benefits any party or any particular interest which regions we do. I would, however, suggest that we not hopscotch around the state, that we move from one direction to another. The schedule that I propose starts in the east and moves west. Perfectly happy to switch to west and move east. But because we have to deal with spillover from one region to the next, it would be difficult if we were just hopping all around the state. And I'd be happy to share a spreadsheet version of this with the commission if people want to digest and give us direction.
And I would just sort of pause for a second. Are there, and this is what we had met with the map drawers, and I think they're in agreement with tackling the state this way. Are there feelings one way or the other from commission members? You can give me a thumbs up if you're okay with this type of schedule. I mean, I think the way we're looking at, we're sort of wrapping up at least most of the heavy duty work by October 1, Friday, October 1, with this type of schedule.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Delegate Simon.
I don't necessarily have a problem with the schedule. I do have concerns. I'll just throw it out there for now, and maybe we can come back to it later. But putting too tight a definition on these regions, and at least came up a little bit, but marking Fairfax County's boundaries as an outer limit and packing districts into Fairfax artificially because that's the way the region was defined. We haven't really all decided on that. I know that one of the maps bleeds a little bit into Loudoun County and some other places, but I think when we start to end up having at the end of this, we're gonna have to look at this whole map and decide whether advantages or disadvantages. And so I'm just gonna throw it out there for the map drawers to hear. I hope they don't feel super constrained by the outer boundaries of these regions and feel free if they need to spill over, because I think it may be necessary in some cases. I think Eastern Prince William and Western Fairfax may have more in common with each other than Western Fairfax and Central Fairfax in some cases and so forth.
John?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Delegate Simon. We are aware of these regions. They were proposed by the commission for public comment, and it's a useful guideline for, dividing the state a little bit. So we have a starting point. And as we said, we were under time pressure to get something to you today. So we started with an area that, as you can see, was fairly agreeable in terms of not having a great impact with the racially polarized voting. And again, it represents almost 20% of the state. So we did make progress in that area. And I think that the regional boundaries are reasonable. And also, I'll just comment on this because I'll probably be asked. This proposed schedule seems reasonable. And again, with the caveat that we might go a little beyond the region or a little less than the region as defined.
And I'd say I totally agree with Delegate Simon. We need to be conscious of spillover, and I would encourage the commission, if you do get to the point of taking votes in a week on a region, that they'd be considered a tentative approval of particular districts, knowing that the ripple effect as we get to the rest of the state may require revisiting some of those districts.
Right.
So moving on to the specifics of the Northern Virginia region. So we were working, this is actually a subset of, in the commission's definition of 8 regions, sort of a centralized subset: City of Alexandria, Arlington County, City of Falls Church, Fairfax County, and the City of Fairfax. This is an area that's grown roughly to 10% over the last 10 years. And also has become somewhat more diverse. It was majority white 10 years ago, 56% white. Now it is just under 50%, 49% white. It's still a plurality white, but no longer an absolute majority. And that's been reflected in what we're able to see in these districts. Echoing again what Dr. Palmer said, there's not significant racially polarized voting, so we weren't constrained by that. But we did want to track how many plurality white versus majority white and plurality Hispanic districts there were. The majority white districts in this draft plan went down by 1, while the plurality went up by 1, and we were able to maintain the 1 plurality Hispanic district. We also looked at compactness. There are dozens of different compactness scores, and you can, if you've got any one district, you can always find a score that makes that district look good. I like to look at averages across all of the districts, and that helps preclude cherry picking different scores. These were just 2 that we looked at: Weehawken and Polsby Popper. In both of these, their scores that range from 0 to 1, with 1 being the most compact. So as you see here, our draft districts, we were able to raise the compactness under both of these scores. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Zach, who can bring up the map. I realize we're tight for time, but if people have any specific questions and they want to zoom in on particular areas of the region and see what we've done with the lines there, we can.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Delegate Simon.
I have a lot of questions. We'll probably take more time than we've got here. This is my, neck of the woods, right? And
yes.
I know, again, this is very preliminary. So let me ask a couple of questions that are more your process and thinking about these things. because I will note, and this is an issue that was raised by Senator Newman and Senator Barker before we went in. This map has a, it's harder to tell with yours, frankly, than Mr. Morgan's, but there's a lot of incumbent duplication that happens in this map. And so I guess my question is, what communities of interest were you looking at? Did you guys use school boundary districts? Did you use judicial circuits? How did we arrive? Or was it mostly just trying to fit the puzzle together with population size? I'm trying to figure out, there seems to be a couple of cases where incumbents live at the very edge of their new district. And if you move the line a little bit, I don't know if any consideration was given to doing that or if you were told not to. I seem to recall we said it was okay to consider current incumbent addresses. I know I may get in trouble with the activists out there watching about this, but there's where in the process, if at all, did you consider where the incumbents live? And what was the bigger question is, how did you define communities of interest to get this together?
Several good points there. So we consciously did not look at incumbents, partly because of the time crunch and partly because we had not received direction from the commission. I know under the criteria, it does say that incumbency may be considered in the map drawing process. So we realize that is something that we may want to do. We do have an incumbents point file that we can put up incumbent addresses up on the map. We did not turn that on when we're drawing these. So we're agnostic as to incumbency. In terms of communities of interest, we were looking at political geography, so the counties, the cities, and the VTDs, the precincts. We did not turn on the school district layer, although in Northern Virginia, much more so than in other areas, they do tend to follow other political jurisdiction lines. And then clearly we did not have community input on communities of interest. And that's another reason why we may need to come back and revisit this once the community input tool is up and running and we're able to see what members of the public have said. There may be communities of interest that we were not aware of that we should have been respecting.
One follow-up.
Okay, one more, and then we're going to get Zach to pull up the maps just so that we can take a look at them. But it's good to understand the rationale behind this. And again, these are just draft maps. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Delegate Simon.
The question, again, we don't have to have an answer, but given that, I'm curious as to why the town of Herndon got split. If you were trying to keep the geography together, and that was also one place where you spilled over into Loudon. So I'm just a little bit curious about what's going on in the northwest section of your map. I assume you guys are map. Make sure I'm assuming you're map B. Is that right?
I'm not actually sure how those were labeled by Legislative Services. In fact, maybe this is a perfect segue. Should we bring up the map and we can see? Yes. And you can direct us to that area?
Yeah, so you're District 19 on this map. It looks like I'm told that it may split the town of Herndon, and it does also, decide to depart from Fairfax a bit. Do you have any specific thoughts about what you guys were thinking on District 19? I don't live there, by the way.
Okay, I'll defer to Zach, who actually drew these districts on that.
Yes, with Herndon. The information that we got from Autobound, it did not include city boundaries. And so that I noticed that Herndon was split after the map was already submitted, but the only boundaries we were given were VTDs, counties, and independent cities.
Gotcha. So you didn't have towns like the town of Vienna, the town of Herndon, town of Clifton. Gotcha. All right.
So we can add that in. We can add that in as an independent additional layer. And then regarding District 19, it spills over into Loudoun County just to keep the populations within that 2% threshold. So I didn't want to leave a partial district in the map.
Senator Barker, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Okay. And again, this is just draft. This is our first, we've been meeting since January, first map out of the gate. And again, draft. Okay.
Yes. Well, I appreciate the draft part of it, because otherwise I think I would be submitting my resignation from the Senate today. But I'm on my house is in map 6, as I recall, on the Senate list. And I sort of feel like a little bit of like a no good deed goes unpunished, having spent 6 or 7 years working on getting the constitutional amendment passed, that this is the first map that comes out there. But in my situation, in the Senate, we are due to get basically 2/3 to 4/5 of a Senate seat added in Northern Virginia. We have multiple members who are either have declared they're not going to run for re-election or are at least questionable at best on that. And out of the Fairfax County delegation there are only 3 that have categorically said that we are running. One of those is Senator Boysko, who probably 85% of her district is in Loudoun County, not in Fairfax County. So not having them here presents an issue. And in addition, what we have is a situation where that leaves just 2 other people, and you put the 2 of us both in the same district, Senator Peterson and myself, and you put virtually all of the precincts in his district in the district. And out of about 50 precincts in my district, I think there may be 2 or possibly 3 districts that are actually where I'm in my current district. So I think it's important to look at those types of issues here to make sure that you are not unfairly disadvantaging one legislator over another legislator when there are 5 districts and only 3 people who are guaranteed to run it have declared unequivocally they're going to be running again that are in the part of Fairfax County that you incorporated there. So I think we need to make sure that we're balancing all different perspectives on things and trying to make sure that we give opportunity for people to get reelected when there's an additional district coming up our way, and there are multiple people who are likely not to be running next time. So
thank you. And I think, again, we, as a commission, we voted on the criteria that we're using, and we gave instruction to the map drawers. And honestly, it is a balancing act of trying to look at all of that criteria and try to come up with something that we can all agree on and maps that are fair for the citizens of Virginia. So again, this is preliminary. Obviously, the representatives from Northern Virginia have more knowledge around where some of these lines are, but I would encourage all commission members to dig in a little bit deeper and blow them up and take a look. And I'm hoping that our data management consultants will quickly get that up and running so that we can look at comments from various constituents from Northern Virginia to help influence the shaping of what the final lines will be. Ken or Zach, is that for the most part, are those the 2 maps that you wanted to share with the commission at this point from your perspective?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's great. We're a little over time, but we padded it by a few minutes. So John, are you have other maps that you're going to share with us?
Yes, I'll start my clock now.
Okay.
So basically, to the data points that Ken raised, in general, I agree with what he said, that the 2020 data in its current form is not very useful to a map drawer. And as far as a resolution of that, I'm not sure how you would proceed with that. Certainly, I would encourage us to work with DLS in that process to see how that would be resolved, or if it needs to be resolved. And again, my understanding is that we're looking at legislative maps first, which are not up in presidential or even numbered years. So the more relevant data might be the statewide elections from 17, although the other data is available to some extent. So I'm just going to do, I'm going to go right into the maps because, again, I think Ken took some of this time explaining the data. I'll just have a couple, let's see, let's do the delegates first. So just as a reference, And let me bring up my screen to share. So I was given instruction to, draw these plans with Northern Virginia. It's the same geographic area that Ken identified. It is the County of Arlington, the County of Fairfax, the independent cities of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax. And so that's what I've got. Okay, so I'm just sharing this. These are the boundaries of the current delegate districts in blue. There are no numbers on that. There's no voting precincts. This is just the same geographic area. And then these are the boundaries of the proposed delegate districts, the draft delegate districts that I worked on with my team. So that just gives you an idea of what they look like. And this supports and is also towards compactness. I also looked at the average compactness scores, and they're substantially more compact than the existing districts. And I guess I'll go ahead and put the Senate map up because I'd rather spend more time talking about the individual districts. So here are the current Senate districts are here in this region. And these are the proposed Senate districts in the map that I worked on. And now I'll bring up the maps for discussion. So the data that we received was from the Autobound Edge, and I did speak to Fred Hijazi, who's your software vendor, and he was able to get the data on my computer, get it working. And I will say that I guess I'd have to disagree a little bit with Zachary's comments. The Autobound Edge data did include the census designated places, which includes the towns. It was in a different location, but it was in the data that was provided to me for drawing. So these are the delegate districts in the proposed plan here. I labeled this N1 for N for Northern Virginia and the inner part of Northern Virginia. So first off, in terms of population, Arlington has enough population for 2 whole districts and about 75% of another district. Alexandria has enough for just under 2 whole districts. Falls Church obviously is a much smaller locality, and that has enough population for a little over a quarter of a delegate district. And then City of Fairfax is about, 28% of a delegate district. And then Fairfax County is 13 1/3. So that's kind of the population that we were given to work with in this starting map. So for me, I started with, again, the City of Alexandria. So this follows District 1 here, follows the outer boundary of the City of Alexandria, and it comes right up to Douglas MacArthur School. And then the other district in Alexandria is primarily Old Town, the balance of the city boundary, and then it goes over into Huntington. So it takes a portion of Fairfax County, but only the portion that would be necessary to round out that district. Likewise, in Arlington, there's 3 districts that are principally in Arlington. There's the central district here, which is primarily what I would consider, from my experience, I do live in this area. I graduated from South Lakes High School in Reston. I've been a resident of Northern Virginia since 1978. I currently live in Springfield. But anyway, this is the area that's fairly dense. This is Ballston, Clarendon, Virginia Square. Those are the metro stops. But these are the areas that have seen, from my experience, a lot of change in the older housing that's been changed over and replaced with high rises and things like that. And then the northern part of Arlington, this is more like Cherrydale and those areas here. It's, I guess I'd say it's more single family residences and such. And then you have South Arlington here, and then this district, District 3, goes outside of the boundary of Arlington in the Bailey's Crossroads area, which is here. And this area in South Arlington along Glebe Road, and then this area here of Bailey's Crossroads is included in District 3.
Sure.
All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. District 6, Delegate Simon. This is the area I understand that you represent. It's the City of Falls Church and the area immediately around it, going a little bit north into the Chesterbrook area. And then on the south side, you have Lee Highway here. And then it also has there's a new voting precinct here, which is the Mosaic District in Maryfield. Then District 7 is Barcroft and Annandale, and then it comes down a little bit here into Lincolnia and Franconia. Oh, sorry, not Franconia, Lincolnia and yeah, Lincolnia there. Okay. District 8, this is where I am actually right now. This is North Springfield, and then it goes up here into the area right outside of Fairfax City, Mantua. District 9 is primarily Franconia, and it also includes Fort Belvoir, more or less in entirety. It follows the 95 as a dividing line. And then District 10 is the Hybla Valley. This is the Route 1 corridor. It also does include Westgate, which is the precinct down here on the Potomac. District 11 is primarily Lorton and a portion of Springfield. And then you can see Burke Lake is over here. District 12 is primarily Burke. This would be the district, I believe, that the speaker represents currently. District 13 is the city of Fairfax. And then down here to Sideburn. And again, I didn't have the incumbent addresses, but I've met Delegate Bulova before, and my understanding is that he lives in Sideburn, although he may have moved, I don't know. And then this goes over to Fair Oaks, just on the outer edge. It has the Greenbrier precincts, District 13. District 14, this is an instance where I can put the layers on and show you here. The visibility is on. So this is the town of Vienna. So the town of Vienna, and also, since I turned this on, this layer, the town of Herndon, they have elected governments. They have a mayor and a council. And then also the other town we have in Fairfax County is Clifton. So in this case, I've kept the town of Vienna intact. These are the voting precincts that comprise Vienna, as well as the surrounding area, Flint Hill, Wolf Trap, Freedom Hill, and then also Oakton. There, some question, Mosby Woods could go with Fairfax, it could go with the Vienna district. In this case, I'd put it with the Vienna district. Then District 15 is McLean, Great Falls. It also follows the Route 7 corridor right here. This is Colvin and Shouse. This is where Wolf Trap is. And then out here, you've got, let's see, Clearview, Sugarland, and again, this area, it's sometimes people associated with Herndon. It's Herndon High School, at least from what I recall. So it could go with Herndon, but it also sometimes associates with the area to the north. And then I have a district that's primarily Reston, and this is it. Again, Reston is not it's not an incorporated place with town elections. In fact, in the past, they've always referred to it as a place called Reston, and that's where I grew up. So I'm fairly familiar with that, but this takes in North Reston. This is the toll road. So it's got all the areas that people would consider Reston, plus Vale and Waples Mill. And then here in Herndon, I've got the town of Herndon. And then to the south, this area here in the Fox Mill area has seen a lot of change in the type of housing. They were older houses built probably in the 50s, and they were replaced around Greg Roy Lane. And now there are a lot of, townhouses, and it's been a change. But this follows the Route 28 corridors here, and then it has a little bit of Navy and Franklin Farm areas as well. And then the last district is primarily centered on Centerville. So these are the areas that are in and around Centerville, as well as Chantilly. So those are the delegate districts, and I've consumed about half of my time, but why don't I just go ahead and pause for questions. As far as communities of interest go, I did my best from my personal experience to bring what I have and my thoughts to the table. And also on my mapping team, we have Kent Stegall, who was a senior GIS specialist with the Division of Legislative Services. He's now retired, but he was a 20-year veteran of that operation, and he's assisting me in some of this as well. So I thought I'd just mention that. But I drafted these districts, and again, I'll just pause for just a moment, and then I'd ask your indulgence for me to then proceed to the Senate.
Delegate Simon?
Yeah, real quick. I first want to apologize for any negative thing I said. You've drawn me the perfect district for me personally. So thank you for that. So anything you read in the press that I said about you, or maybe I said on the record, I take it all back. No. As a question about this, the communities of interest, though, serious question. You stopped, with Arlington because you were instructed to keep the county boundaries together. But somebody who knows the district, wouldn't you agree that people in North Arlington, the community of North Arlington, may have more in common with McLean than it does with Crystal City? And so did you find that you were drawing a district from North Arlington down to Crystal City to obey that boundary, but maybe it wouldn't make as much sense if you're trying to actually maintain people of similar political and thoughts and social and all these other things that we consider community of interest? Wouldn't it have made more sense to keep that going into McLean rather than going down the river through the cemetery and down to Crystal City?
Sure, and I understand that, you've got the military population and the Pentagon there, which, gives you one very large precinct right around Fort Myers. And I guess what I'd say is, since I was trying to keep the political subdivisions intact, there's only so much population. It's basically about, 15% or so of a single delegate district. So I ended up looking for that portion of Fairfax County here in Skyline Plaza, which I think also has a community of interest in my experience with Southern Arlington, Bailey's Crossroads area here. I think in my experience, there's some community of interest there. You have maybe a competing community of interest here in the portion of Fairfax County that's in McLean and Chesterbrook. So you could go either way. But I would say that since I was looking at only taking a fraction of Fairfax County, they're not, they're exclusive in the sense that I only took a small portion of Fairfax County. So you could do one or another. So I think that's an option absolutely to consider. Other questions, and then I'll move to the Senate.
Why don't we go on and move to the Senate,
Okay.
John?
All right, give me just a moment to switch maps. Let's see here. I'll share. And I apologize for talking so fast, but I'm trying to get through a lot of material in a short amount of time.
Okay. I hope you guys are as knowledgeable in other areas of the state as Northern Virginia, your home turf there.
Well, thank you for that consideration. I've actually been to every county and independent city in the Commonwealth. So in my travels, my experience, I've been to all of those areas at one time. Okay, so back to sharing the screen. Okay, so these proposed Senate districts, again, just looking at the ratios of the localities. So Arlington by itself is enough, almost enough for a Senate district. Actually, it's more than enough for a Senate district. It's about 10% over an ideal Senate district. So in this case, I took all of Arlington and just took the southern portion and combined it with Alexandria. And then the area here, Grosvenor, this is Mount Eagle and, Groveton and Huntington, and then Belhaven, I think, Bellevue. I don't think I went all, Belhaven, Bellevue, exactly. So that's the area that's just outside the Beltway. And my understanding is that some of these areas here actually have Alexandria addresses. And that may also be the case with some areas along the border of Alexandria in another area. So one district is primarily Arlington, then all of Alexandria plus South Arlington and these communities here in Fairfax County. District 3 it's going to be Bailey's Crossroads, Barcroft, City of Falls Church and the surrounding environment. And then it takes this area in where I am now, North Springfield. I believe that's Senator Saslaw primarily, that's his district. And then District 4, it's Reston, McLean, Langley, and it does not have Herndon. And then District 5 is Herndon and similar areas I discussed in the delegate districts. And this follows the Route 28 corridor right down here through Chantilly to Centerville, and then this is at I-66 right here. And so this district has Herndon, the Fox Mill, Franklin Farm areas, and although, yeah, that's right. And then Navy, and then you've got Chantilly, including Greenbrier, Centerville, Senate District 5. Senate District 6 is the city of Fairfax, and then also it keeps intact the town of Vienna. And then you've got Oakton in it. And then you've got Mosby Woods down here is the high school. Sorry, Mosby Woods up here. I'm thinking Woodson. Woodson's the high school here on the south of Fairfax. And then it also goes all the way out here to Clifton, and this is Senator Chap Peterson. And then Senate District 7 that I have here is the balance of Franconia, and then it also goes into Burke. And then this area here, the Hybla Valley and the Route 1 corridor, I didn't draw that, although this does, this is basically Senate District 36 as it exists now, which it goes down the Senator Survell, who was previously a delegate in the District 44. And so this would be available for a potential other Senate district there. So I didn't actually draw that Senate district out, because population-wise, you end up with 7 Senate districts entirely in the region, and then there's some population over it. So I didn't fill that out. So again, I will pause. I'll leave the screen on, but let me pause for questions. And I'm at just at the end of my time, about 2 minutes left on the clock.
Any comments from commission members on, again, draft, Senate and/or House maps?
I have a question real quick.
Yes,
So,
Delegate Simon.
I know you guys, I don't know if you guys were able to look at political data or not, but if you were, and you were doing like a heat map of red and blue, would these be like really bright blue seats, all of them? Or are there some that would be more purple? Or are there some that would be pink? Or would there be some that would be red? Any of them?
Sure, that's an interesting question. The political data was available. I really didn't look at it too much. I think after I finished drawing, I looked at it a little bit, and then we have an analyst that is a former House member from Vermont, and also an election analyst and expert, Clark Benson. He's assisting me on that. So he's able to look at the political data and inform me about that. But in the drawing process, I didn't really look deeply at the political data. It is available to me, and it was provided to me by the Legislative Services data. But yeah, most of these districts would be solidly Democratic. The one Senator Peterson's district has some portions that might be considered Republican areas, on the outskirts of Fairfax, Pope's Head, Fairfax Station, places like that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Go ahead and have a subcommittee of just the 8 Democratic members, work on refining these maps. But I'll leave that, since we can't do motions today, I'll leave that alone.
Oh, sure. Senator Barker, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a quick 2 comments. One is the one that has probably the most or is least heavily Democratic is District 5. There, going up along the western side.
Centerville. Yeah, that's a good point. Although with Herndon in it, I'm not sure. I think
Herndon does sway it a little bit, but the other one that would be competing with that is 6, and I live in the last house in Fairfax County before you get to Prince William, in 6. So I'm the one that is in Chap Peterson's district, and I only have a couple of precincts that are in here.
Okay.
Because nearly all of mine is in Fairfax County is in District 7.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
where that's where I've been running for the last 12 years, 16 years now. So
right. So your Senate District 39 goes from Alexandria right out to the outskirts of Manassas. That's right.
Yes,
so
right.
I see.
And that and that was originally drawn by the Republicans, so it wasn't my fault. So
yeah, no, I understand that. I guess what I'd say is maybe consider this as a conversation starter. So I'm happy to take your input and make adjustments as suggested. So that's what I have to say.
All right. Thank you so much, John, and Ken and Zach. I mean, all of that sort of almost got us into the time frame, and I think. Do we have these maps available to us to be able to go in and see? I don't know who I'm asking this, but over the next couple of days, do commission members have an opportunity to go in and actually see this in greater detail?
Madam Chair, so we do have everything posted with the meeting materials. And then we can also, Julie's not on this call, so I don't want to speak for her, but I believe we'll be able to send you all some more detailed information to dig into if that's what you're looking for.
Actually, Meg, I'm here.
Okay, hey, Julie.
Yeah, those plans are loaded into our software here, so you guys could come by and look, or yeah, I can try to run reports and dig information you're interested in.
So I think what we want to do, and again, the cadence of our meetings is trying to on typically on a Monday, we would get a new region of the state to review, and then we would have a few days to think about it, go to Julie, look in more detail, and then try to narrow down, whatever changes we would want when we would meet later on that week, and maybe try to take some votes to definitely do this. Maybe this is still a little up in the air. But it's going to be intensive, and I think we were trying to figure out if we could meet twice a week. Mondays, we have those already on our calendars. We appreciate everyone giving feedback on their availability, and having looked at your collective responses for the most part. And I know it conflicts with some folks. We have Thursdays that seem to be consistently available, with the exception of the last week of September to begin with. But we need some days in between a Monday, our typical Monday meeting, and to give the map drawers time to take our feedback, make adjustments, and then, re-present things a day or two, a couple of days later. And we can, if you guys are okay with that rhythm, and it does mean coming to Richmond a couple of times a week, because we do need time in between for the map drawers to have time to make adjustments, and would love to know feedback around that kind of meeting rhythm here, what people are thinking. Senator Barker, do you have your hand up on the screen?
I had a hand up on the screen, but it was actually a different thing. But I'm fine with
right.
I'm fine with meeting twice a week. That's I think we need to keep moving on things. But I just wanted to make sure that the staff could get us the precincts of each of the for the maps, so we don't have to guess as to which precincts are where on that map.
So I think that's a good case, because we heard some comments from citizens on trying not to break up precincts as much as we can, but I don't know if that's another layer of data that could be included on the maps as well, that the map drawers are providing.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Sean, please.
Yeah, Sean Kumar. Yeah, no, I'm fine. I know we did that poll. Staff typically sent out that poll maybe a few weeks now, and that data. I just say if we're going to set dates, the sooner the better, because a lot of those dates that I was available 2 or 3 weeks ago, I may not be available anymore. So and then on the scheduling note, just a preference. I mean, I know we've heard from the community about different times. Like, I don't know if we're going to, if we're going to be meeting during business hours, and that's all the same to some others. And I know the poll asked morning meetings for those of us that have to travel a great distance may be better, because it allows us to maybe try to drive home and salvage part of a business day if it's not going to be a full business day. Whereas an afternoon meeting, it doesn't really allow that as easily. That would be my comment on scheduling.
Okay, and we have all of the commissioners are super busy, and it's just we're going to pinch somebody somewhere along the way, and I think we're going to try to do the best that we can. But my hope is that we'll get this calendar out. I need to talk with Mackenzie more and the staff and roll this down, but it's no perfect situation, and we have to do it in a way where we have a quorum as well, which is tough.
And the sooner, again, this is Sean Kumar. I get it that everyone's working hard at it, but there's days I'm available today that I could reserve if I get the calendar today that by Tuesday I won't be, and I just want to try to be available for a quorum.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
This is Claire Waters.
Claire.
I just wanted to say that with the upcoming schedule, we tried our hardest to work with everyone's schedule, and we just now recently received everyone's availability. So thank you for holding tight with us as we finish this up. So I just wanted to add that there.
Yeah, and possibly if Claire and Meg and Mackenzie have a little bit of time when this meeting is done, we might try to just pick the dates and then try to refine that and get it out to folks. I know everybody's been clamoring for it, but literally it was a day ago that we got all commission members availability. So there we go. John, did you have your hand? John Morgan, did you have your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the voting precincts, and I would just say that it's fairly easy to do reports that show any split voting precincts. And in the delegate plans that I showed you here, there were a total of 3 voting precincts that were split for population equality reasons.
Okay, thank you very much. Meg?
Just as a explanation by why some of the materials weren't sent out to you all ahead of time and why we don't have the complete district report with all of those precincts. I think because of the timeline, the map drawers didn't have a ton of time to get their maps done and to DLS, and then we had to generate the reports and create the maps. And then that took a little bit of time. And there were some last minute changes. And so we just had to make a call about for this report saying which one do they need, but we'll definitely make sure we do the complete district report with the precincts going forward. And then we're going to work with the map drawers to kind of figure out a good rhythm for them to get us the materials to give us enough time to get them ready for you all. But
okay. All right. And Senator Barker?
Just an FYI thing. Obviously split precincts are sometimes an issue. We addressed that in the General Assembly this past decade, and Senator Obenchain and I worked together so that where a precinct is split by us, the commission, for a legislative seat or for a congressional seat or for a local government seat, that the local government, the local board of elections, is to basically put those whole so that you don't have people voting in 2 different elections for the same type of seat, which is where we've had a lot of problems in Virginia in the past, including some in Fredericksburg that contributed significantly to some of the angst of people who kept coming to us and saying, get all of Fredericksburg in one place. So.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? This was an exciting day. Lots of good information shared. And I can feel the momentum really being very strong right now for the commission. I think I would encourage everyone to read the package of information that was sent out for this meeting fully, myself included. And then you have a little time over the long holiday weekend. And then Julie is available to help if people want to massage some of the proposed maps and come up with ideas to share. That would be great. And then we will be in person in Richmond next Thursday at 1 o'clock. I think the other thing that we tested with members is that we really are looking at the 8 to 11 time frame or 1 to 4 time frame. That's what we tested with you all around availability. And I know that it limits citizens who work, their participation as we're going through these meetings. But we're all working as well and trying to squeeze in within a relatively short time frame to try to do it. So I think that's the best that we can offer. All right. With that, I think if there is enough. Yes, did someone else?
Does Mr. Hebert have his hand up?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hebert. I'm sorry, I missed you. Yes.
That's okay. I'll be quick. I just think that we don't have communities of interest data yet for the map drawers. And so I think that a lot of the public comment has been around that issue, and I know how important it is to members of the commission. And I think that splitting counties and cities, for example, in Northern Virginia may actually be a lot of that public input. I know in my hometown of Alexandria, we prefer to be split, not in one Senate district. We like having more than one senator. So I think that as that data become available, I think these districts, as Chair Harris has pointed out, are purely just a starting point and almost hypothetical at this point.
Thank you very much. We're all stepping out on faith together and leading with our values as we try to create fair maps for the Commonwealth. And with that, I want to transition to the public comment period. We have
Madam Chair, I hate James Abrino. I hate to hold up. I just had one question, just for process purposes.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I appreciate the map drawers' efforts. I did have a question about at some point, because I know the lawyers have worked together to try to present single documents and things like that. At some point, I just worry that, I'm wondering at some point, are they going to communicate with each other? Are they communicating with each other? Are they trying to come up with maps together? That kind of thing. Because, as we get deeper into this, I just think that would be useful.
I think so. I think when we met, we had asked whether or not there was agreement from both sides to maybe present maps that they could agree on. And honestly, I don't know Northern Virginia that well, so I don't know the difference. I could see the shape of the map, the two different maps that were presented, but I don't know if that is feasible, or we take one map and make adjustments to it, or we think that there's an opportunity to blend the two maps to have something that is presented to the commission. Brian, you came off of mute. Yeah. Did you
Yes,
have
Madam Chair, I was just going to explain briefly that for this one, given the timeline, I don't think there was a chance for anybody to kind of talk to each other before the meeting today. That being said, I think we would like to take some direction from the commission about what y'all want to have from us. I think we're open to proceeding with some sort of initial talk ahead of time. We're kind of looking at where there's overlap in between meetings, whatever works best. But that's the reason for not having a kind of agreed upon section this time.
I mean, it really, they did a yeoman's job of turning this around in a few days. So I would say, before our next meeting, if there is an opportunity for both sets of map drawers can see where there is common ground, and then the areas where there's some disagreement, and then that's where the commission members can really weigh in. That would be great. And again, we can't emphasize enough that this is an iterative process that has to happen in a relatively short period of time. And we have to be flexible with input from citizens around our process and the product that we're delivering. And with that, I believe that we will begin our public comment period. And the first person who is on the list today is Joe Graber, and I'm
Madam
sorry
Chair,
if I'm
Madam Chair, excuse me, this is Shay. We only have three
okay
right now. They're Daquan Love, Aaron Corbett, and Liz White, and I'm gonna go ahead and promote everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, Shay. Okay. All right, so Daquan Love, are you here? Let's see, Aaron. I see Liz and Daquan Love. There we go. Hi, Mr. Love. Thank you and welcome to the commission, and you are on mute.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm Daquan Marcel Love, Executive Director of the Virginia State Conference NAACP. Recognizing the totality of the tasks that you all have as commissioners, we understand that you're under tight timelines and deadlines. We understand that the consultants and lawyers are doing the best that they can. However, I'm here today because I truly do fear that there's a lack of transparency with this process. And what I'm asking for on behalf of the NAACP is that all of the communications between the lawyers and consultants and commissioners outside of the meetings should be made available to the public and put on the website. There are drafts between the drafts that are presented publicly that should be made available on the website for citizens to be able to view. While I understand and recognize the timelines and deadlines that you all are under, I think and I know that it would be extremely helpful to reassure the public, especially Black Virginians who count very much in this Commonwealth, to be able to rest assured that this is a transparent and a clear process. As far as I can see, right now, I don't see much of a difference between this process and the smoke-filled back rooms. It seems like we've just replaced cigars with consultants. And so I would hope that this commission would take additional steps to ensure transparency, make those communications, those drafts, that information publicly available, and make sure that we as the general public have a good opportunity and a decent amount of time, at least 2 to 3 business days, to review these maps that come before you. I think that that is a very fair and legitimate ask, and I think that if you do that, you'll find that folks will feel a little bit more assured with the work of this commission. While we're grateful for the efforts that you all are making, we're going to continue to push you to do even more and to make sure that we're being as transparent as possible, because very much so, our lives depend on this being a fair and equitable process. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Love. We appreciate your comments, and we're trying to get better with each day that passes as we're going through this process. Our next speaker is Liz White. Good to see you, Liz. And if you could come off mute, there you go. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me speak to you again. I'm Liz White. I'm the Executive Director of One Virginia 2021. I'm going to echo a lot of what Mr. Love just said, but bear with me. This commission has done an admirable job so far at introducing sunlight into a previously cloaked and secretive process. Your work has been done out in the open, and for better or for worse, the public has watched you make tough decisions, have complicated conversations, and navigate a brand new system. And we know, as do you, that the pace and intensity of the work is only going to increase from here. So with that in mind, I just want to emphasize 2 ways that transparency can be enhanced. The transparency in this process is only as effective as the access provided to the public to the process. So first, materials should be released in a more timely manner. The agendas and materials for commission meetings are regularly posted only 1 to 2 business days in advance, which doesn't allow for a significant time for the public to plan and prepare for upcoming discussions, particularly when they have to drive to Richmond to be heard. The link to testify at today's meeting, which was an important one-off opportunity for people to be heard without driving to Richmond, it was only active for about a day and a half before that registration deadline. And again, only on the commission website. It wasn't tweeted, it wasn't sent out to the listserv. It was only on that website, which only a handful of us hardcore nerds check every day. So now that the maps are actively being drafted, public input is more important than ever, and opportunities for involvement should be increasing, not shrinking. Second, the meetings and materials need to be better advertised and more widely distributed. often information like the draft maps that you all looked at today were only posted on the website, not in a public release or emailed, or the information isn't always reliably on Twitter. So the public must rely on outside groups and individuals who make it a habit to check the website every day to get that information. I've heard from some of our supporters and a few journalists who've expressed the same frustration. I am thrilled that your communications teams are starting their work. I really enjoyed the presentation earlier. I anticipate that their involvement will help mitigate this issue significantly. We all know that getting the average voter to be active in this process has been challenging. So as we move forward, we just all need to do so with an eye toward making participation as simple and uncomplicated as possible for all Virginia residents. We're moving into the meat of this process, and public engagement is more important than ever. So I just encourage you all to work to make it as easy as possible for citizens across the Commonwealth to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. We appreciate your comments, and we'll take that feedback to heart. Our last speaker, unless Shay tells me otherwise, Erin Corbett.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me. My name is Erin Corbett, redistricting manager at the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. And I just wanted to see if there's any chance I could get clarification on a couple things. I know sometimes engagement is a little tricky, but just was really hoping that we could get an understanding of when the public hearings start. I know back when we were expecting the census data to be delivered August 16th, there was sort of a preliminary schedule released. And then earlier in one of the presentations, we saw slides that said October dates. So planning around the public hearings is certainly not easy. So the sooner we can have clarification on those days, the better our work is. So that would be one point of clarification we would really appreciate. Clarification number 2 is that in the PDF versions of the maps, there is a reference to using, in a lot of the footnotes at the bottom of every map, there's a reference to using 2010 census data. And a lot of our partners were concerned that that would suggest that 2010 census data was used versus 2020 census data. So again, just was hoping to get clarification on whether or not that is the case or is not the case. And then the third point is in the spreadsheets that detail the demographics of every theoretical district proposed. The ways in which demographics are broken down is by sort of white Virginians, Black Virginians, Hispanic Virginians, and then minority Virginians. And we would love to see that teased out more, to see AAPI Virginians and other demographics more represented in those tables, so that there's not just sort of like a catch-all minority tab for the demographics. So any clarification on those pieces would be super helpful. But thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin. Appreciate you being here again. And I'm hoping that Meg is still on the call. And
Madam Chair, this is Shay. We have one more, Philip Thompson.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Is he?
Can you hear me?
On the screen. Yes. Hi, Mr. Thompson.
How you doing?
Welcome.
National Black Nonpartisan Redistricting Organization. You know, one of the concerns that I just heard, and I don't know if we got clarification, was how much the community of interest maps and information that's been provided to this commission has gone into this map drawing process or is being considered. A lot of effort went in to get people to draw these maps of the communities of interest, and it didn't sound real clear if your map drawers were taking that into account, or were they planning on taking it out after the fact. One of the issues you have is once you draw maps, once you draw your first maps, generally it's like writing a brief. You know, once you do your first draft, you're not going to stray too far from that draft. So we're concerned with that process. If that information wasn't taken into account when the maps were drawn, then you're kind of setting the table up already for what's going to be considered. And that's a dangerous prospect from the standpoint of public involvement, where the public has no information on that. Also, I heard some discussion about what kind of information went into whatever computer or whatever was used to draw these maps. It'd be nice for the public to know what your programmers put into these into their software or what software they're using, so people can get a better idea of what the heck is going on. Another issue that we have is your outreach firm, and granted, you know, I've worked with these type of consultants before, and they passed all the buzzwords and they said all the things that needed to be said, but gee whiz, we're late in this process, and they got to be a little bit more aggressive than what they're sounding like, you know, saying we'll have something to you next week. No, you got to start this week. You got to start now. You got to start outreach. You got to come see the people that have been in this game for a while, like One Virginia, League of Women Voters, National Black Nonpartisan Redistricting Organization, NAACP. Come see us now so we can talk about how you're going to do outreach. Because I bet a dime to a dollar they have no clue on how to get a hold of a large group of pastors, as one of your commission members said. They have no clue on that. And there are people that have been doing this a while, keeping people informed and need to be involved in this process. So we hope that your communications firm will reach out to the people that have been in this game for a while so they can give them some ideas on how to get going and get off the snide, because the public has not been drawn into this process, as you heard from the comments that you've heard before me. So we hope that you start acting like there's a little bit more of a urgency here in this process, because we're getting late in the game. Maps have been drawn, and you're still talking about, oh, we're going to go out and talk to the public. Really, we should have been doing that months ago. We can't go back and refix that, but that's where we are. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate your effort. One last thing, we'd also like to see possibly the brief that was filed on behalf of the commission in the Supreme Court case, so that we can know what this commission's position is in that case. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Thank you for being here again today. Meg, I was wondering if on the calendar we have the new dates for the public hearing.
We didn't have any set in stone yet, because we had just discussed adjusting that that week to reflect the new schedule we're going to be working under. So we haven't been able to start booking any of those. And I think the consultants were also going to be, the communications team is also going to be taking over that. So, but we're still looking at, if it's all right with the commission, we're still planning on the week of the October 4th.
Yep. Okay. All right. And I think more details to come on that. And we're hoping, I would say definitely by next week, we will have our calendars set. We'll know when the public hearings are. We'll know when commission member meetings are. And so would encourage people to, I think we've been readying ourselves for this, and all of the feedback has been helpful in trying to, again, make our processes transparent and as inclusive as possible as we go through this body of work. So if there are no more comments at this point, I would say that our meeting is adjourned for today, and I may end up sending an email to Mackenzie and Meg and Claire, and we, if we can finalize the meeting calendar, we'll try to do that maybe today, and get that out to commissioners so that you can lock down your calendars if at all possible. So thank you, everyone, and have a good Labor Day holiday weekend.